Time being 7:30, I'd like to start the meeting. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to start with condolences for the family of Michael P. Mack. Mr. Mack served in the 101st Airborne Division, United States Army during the Vietnam War. Also, James G. Rucker. Mr. Rucker served in the United States Army during the Vietnam War. I'd like to have a moment of silence for these two gentlemen and for others we've lost. Thank you. Okay, so moving to A, approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Announcements from the president. I would just like to say that if you have not done so, please send your request for committee appointments or preferences. If you'd like to stay the same or move, suggestions, I'll take those so we can get those wrapped up. Proclamations, we have none. Citizens Open Forum. If any of you folks would like to come up and say anything, come on up, state your name, your address, say a few things. 3 minutes.
Hi, Danielle Silva, 20 Tommy Ann Terrace. Good evening, President Haley, members of the Town Council, Mr. Dutton, and Attorney Rollins. I just want to say I've truly appreciated the opportunity to speak and share information regarding school funding over the last few meetings. And I'm grateful that you all took the time to listen. It is so important that we take into consideration the class size and social emotional needs of our students when considering the funding needs of our school. I was told by an amazing mentor teacher, if you are doing what's in the best interest of students, that you can't go wrong. So that's why I stand here before you again as my last Hail Mary attempt to ask you to please level fund the school district budget for the FY19 school year. And I saw a quote from Ben Franklin that I thought pertained to tonight. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. We want our community to create citizens that can meet their full potential. A child's educational experience is the building blocks of their social and academic pathway. Together, let's set them up for success. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to come up and speak?
Good evening, Carlton Hunt, 80 Austin Street. With regard to the Mel Kelwing property purchase and sale, I did note that change has been made to the town to receive $645,000 for the purchase of the property, but there's another clause that says that there is 1.2+ million that will be made available to the developers from the Community Preservation Committee should they vote to do that. That means the town is basically having to put forward $700,000 of our money to support that project. With regard to the $640,000 purchase price, I would request that the council order that funds go to the Housing Trust so that that money is in fact made available to the Housing Trust. So that's what I've noted about that, and I hope that we'll have more discussion about the quote-unquote loan that's in that purchase and sale, because it's not a loan. It's a loan because of legal issues, and it helps the proponent to, in fact, access other funds, which is good. But at the same time, to my knowledge, there's no expectation of repayment. And so I'd like a lot more clarification as to what that exactly means. Thank you.
Any other citizens like to come forward?
Hi, Cheryl Walkup, 254 Park Ave. I have nothing prepared, again. I just want to thank you again for giving us a chance to talk and to express our concerns about the school budget funding. And as a parent of a second grader, and going into third grade and soon to be kindergartner, and a teacher of kindergarten myself in another district, class size and social emotional well-being is so important, and I think it's one of the most misunderstood ideas. And people say, you know, well, back in my day, we had 30 or 40 kids in the class. It's a lot different. We need the school psychologists, the school social workers, we need them there. I mean, just today, I was calling down because we've had issues. I've had children picking up things to use in case they have to fight later. You know, like, they're having emotional problems that I'm trying to deal with this, as well as 22 other children in my classroom that I'm trying to educate. And you need the mental health to be addressed. And if we level fund the district and the school, we can keep the social workers, keep the psychologists, and help keep our class sizes down, which in the long run makes an impact on them in a positive way. So teachers be more effective and their education is more effective. Because in the end, these are our future leaders and our future workers, and if they don't start out with a good education, then where are we going to be? We need to set our priorities and decide where they are. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to step forward and have anything to say?
Hi, Melissa Desjardins. I'm at 33 Pearl Street. I wasn't very prepared either. I'm coming before you as the chair of the CPC. We did discuss this at our last meeting. I'm not sure if you're aware, but about four of us, were favorable to the McElwain sale. It does meet our goals of the Community Preservation Committee, that being the housing, community housing, and 2 people abstained, so I just wanted to pass that along to you. I'd like to see some of that 645 go toward our schools, not just, sorry Carlton, not just the housing trust. I do have a kindergartner that was in a class she was an inclusion class, but that was still 25 students, so half of those students had special needs, and there were still upwards of 25 children in that class. So I'm also here to ask for you to level fund the schools. Back to the McElwain, I will say that I think for the size of the project we get and the commitment that the town has to put forward, the 1.2, we get a $20 million project out of it. So I think that's a good deal. I'd rather see our community housing needs met with a project similar to what is being proposed versus clear cutting parts of the more rural parts of Bridgewater and having those 40B developments that we're seeing. So I know we already are almost at our 10%, but looking long term, we will keep having to meet those numbers. So this project does fulfill that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for Citizens Open Forum? Okay. Seeing none, moving on to appointments. Having none, we have a hearing.
Mr. Haley?
Yes, sir.
If I might just suggest, I think there might be a long and very many people speaking at the hearing, and we have a license transaction, and I see the gentlemen are here for that. Could I make a motion to take that out of order?
I'll second.
So move. Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Agreed. So we will now take the hold off on the hearing, move ahead with the license transaction. which is license transaction, section GA, petition P-2018-007, change of hours for Farmer Series pouring license through the Black Hat Brew Works.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, sir. Any discussion?
None from me, I just wish them well on their new hours.
Okay,
Good for them.
Aye.
so all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
For the record. There we are. Good job to the Brew Works. Thank you for being here.
Start pouring. See you later.
Got it. So that brings us back to the hearing. It is now 7:40. Ask the town manager to kind of frame this, if I may.
Sure, Mr. President. Let me just introduce the budget again. In front of you is the 2019 budget. This budget is formulated, it's practical and balanced within the guidelines that the council set out in its budget resolution. And while the formulation of the budget under the charter is my responsibility, really an effective budget only comes from the collaboration of certainly the council's Budget and Finance Committee, the Finance Committee, the Finance Director, and certainly the town's very dedicated department heads. So over the past 5 years, we have made a lot of very serious progress coming out of very serious financial problems, and that work has been very difficult to everyone, staff, the council, residents, voters, and the schools. And we continue to be disciplined about our budget approach, and that approach has meant, in many cases, that we don't get to fund or propose to fund such things as additional programming. We certainly haven't funded road, building, and infrastructure maintenance. And because of that, we've suffered from a serious and dangerous lack of maintenance. In addition, our town runs on somewhere between a half and 2/3 of the staff that our peers run on. Now, that's not a good thing or a bad thing, that's just a fact. But this year, we were able to formulate a budget, and our total spending has stayed within the constraints of Prop 2.5. Obviously, well over 50% of our revenues are allocated to education, and this budget does not give the district everything it's asked for. No department has received everything it has asked for, but we have been able to increase the Bridgewater Rainham budget by roughly, exactly 3.68% over last year, which is just under $1 million more than last year. But the future, quite honestly, the future health of our town, the rising property values, the ability to attract quality businesses, to fund our infrastructure, to attract civic-minded residents depends on our educational system, and that our educational system is exemplary and supported by all its residents. So I have no doubt that our system and our district needs more participation, more involvement, and likely more money. But for 2019, as a budget policy, our objectives sort of revolved around four things. First, a balanced budget. We have to have a balanced budget. And certainly, we would not propose anything other than a balanced budget. I think our finance department has done a tremendous job identifying for us and putting in very clear language, understandable language, what it means to have a balanced budget. So that's one thing. We want to maintain very basic service levels. We haven't proposed any significant new programming. We just want to maintain the very basic programming that we have. And finally, we want to continue to focus on economic and commercial development, which takes the tax burden off of the residents and places more of a burden on the commercial and industrial tax base. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. This year, we've focused on developing a budget in the context of future sustainability. For the first time, we have a 5-year financial projection, which was developed by our finance team and our finance director at his direction. And that projection has been wholly incorporated into our budget process, and you see the fruits of that labor in front of you tonight. For the most part, the 2019 budget reflects a continuation of our efforts to stabilize the town's finances and staff. 5 years ago, we weren't in great shape. We were getting better. I think we've progressed and gotten a little better each year. Certainly, my focus for the last few years has been almost exclusively on getting ourselves into a position where we're financially healthy. I think we're halfway there. But certainly there's always a long way to go when you're trying to right the ship. I think we've got the ship righted, and now we just need to turn it in the appropriate direction. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I ask your support for this budget, and certainly I appreciate the support that the council's given over the past few years.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I have the hearing paper in front of me as far as the process. So I'm just going to read the brief before it for anybody that's here that hasn't been a part of a hearing. The time devoted to public hearings at any meeting of the town council shall not be more than 3 hours. So although Mr. Fitzgibbons did mention it could go long, it's not going to go longer than 3 hours. Any hearing not completed within the specified time may be continued to another meeting. Hearings which are authorized by the order of the council shall have precedence and shall be followed by public presentations. In all hearings before the council, the case of the petitioner shall be first submitted, except where the president of the council rules otherwise. So now that we have the public hearing open, now it's time for comments. It's not going to be a back and forth. It's kind of, you say your comments, kind of like we did with the public folks coming out and say the thing. We've already discussed a couple of items that are budget related. So, on with discussion.
Anyone from the public?
We do have one.
Public first, Alex.
Scott Walkup, 254 Park Ave. Scott Walkup, 254 Park Ave. I didn't understand what level budgeting was until a few weeks ago, because my wife is a lot more knowledgeable about that things, and she had to explain it all to me. I get that it's a very tough decision to deal with the budget, and I've heard almost every town meeting that we've gone to in the past month or two. I've heard at least one of you say at some point there's a lot of tough decisions ahead, and I kept getting the impression that that's what this was kind of coming to, is you maybe come to the conclusion that you couldn't level fund the school. And I feel like I'm ready to accept that that's a possibility, that might just happen, and we have to accept that. I guess what I just don't want is I don't want it to be blamed on certain groups, like teachers. I've gotten an impression from people, and just in general, it's very easy to blame teachers for the fact that they need contractual raises and things that don't necessarily match the, typical cost of living, things like that. But I can speak from my experience living with a teacher and having two parents as teachers, that everyone says they deserve every penny until they want to say that they don't, and say that maybe they shouldn't have to get that raise so that we can level fund the school, things like that. And I guess I'm just of the opinion that I'd like to not see that as an option to blame the teachers, if that makes sense. So that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Name, address, and
Jenny Burr, 45 Hartswood Way. I open with a quote. Education is the passport to the future. For tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Malcolm X wrote that. And the reason I wanted to start with this evening, it may seem like I'm over-prepared or trying to be dramatic, but that is not the intention. I opened with it because it speaks to the impact of our choices and our priorities. It speaks to how they play on our commitment to education. Not just the education of the mind, but of the heart and soul as well. Over the last couple of weeks, many of us have been up here speaking to the lack of funding and basically begging to level fund. As much as I appreciate the 3.68% increase, which sounds like a lot of money because it's $1 million, which is a lot of money to me, it is 2.06% short of what we need to level fund our schools. What that means to me is that we may not be taking into account the growth that we have encouraged in our town and balancing it with the impact to our children and our communities. I wanted to start off by saying to you, I stand up here as a mom of 3 kids that go to the Mitchell. They are lucky enough to take advantage of all the programs at the school, so things like Lunch Bunch for bullying, Title I reading, but secondly, I also need to come to you as a businesswoman. I'm a VP, part of a business analyst team for a multi-billion-dollar company that is employee-owned and American. My department facilitates out-of-the-box thinking solutions by engaging communication between companies and departments that historically don't want to communicate with each other because that's the same old. And by doing so, by encouraging these communications and thinking outside the box and not taking yesterday as today's rule, we have saved our company hundreds of millions of dollars. Why do I bring this up today to you? I bring this up because I feel as though instead of bringing our departments together, like the teachers and the police force and the DPW and the building department and everybody, we're encouraging silos, which now puts us where we are today. And that is a huge concern to me. I know that in most of these meetings we've been in, a lot of us have stood up to speak for the schools. And I think the missing link is that unity in our town, which scares me. I honestly feel that when I sit here and listen, as a new person to town meetings, for example, Mr. Souza often brings up in a joking fashion the building regulations and what that could mean for revenues coming to our town. It's serious. It's serious, and we've done nothing. I've been at these meetings for 2 months, and I've seen no change. I've only heard Mr. Souza's same joke every single meeting, and it's not funny anymore. I apologize if I seem too emotional, but this is a very dear subject to my heart. I implore you, the leaders of our town, to disrupt the norm. Please, think outside the box and find creative solutions for our children and for our town. If we don't level fund our schools and find that extra 2%, we are stating that our educational priorities are not our priorities. Therefore, at Bridgewater, our children, which are our future, are not our priorities. That is the message that we are sending. I truly believe if we band together as a town with all the brain power that we have and all the walks of life that we come from, together we can keep education a priority and we can strengthen this town. We have to do this together. I believe this in the core.
Thank you for hearing me this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Park Ave. Just a couple questions. You had said that your goal for the budget this year was to maintain very basic service levels. If the budget isn't level funded, there is a teacher retiring in Rainham that they are not replacing. So that's not maintaining a level, because now children are going to have to be in more children in less classrooms. That's increasing the class sizes. Also, in the central office, they are laying off administrative workers. That's not maintaining a level service. So how is this budget maintaining very basic service levels if people who are leaving are not being replaced or people are being laid off? Because that affects the service at the schools. So that's my question.
Thank you. And
Carlton Hunt, 80 Austin Street. I applaud you for getting a balanced budget. It's a legal mandate. But I would, as Energy Committee Chair, note that it's important to maximize for the school, and better if you can, two things. Energy use in this town is a cost-cutting measure that's provided more money to the general account and the ability to budget more over time. There are two items in that budget that are woefully underfunded from an energy perspective, beyond the 15% or the 85% of the last couple of years. One is the street account, light account. That's about $30,000 underfunded. And there's another one that I can't remember, but it's a likewise. If you want to hear about one of the solutions that we could have done, we may still have a chance. I would invite you to come to the Energy Committee tomorrow night at 6:30 to hear about a possible project that we hopefully will still be able to achieve.
thank you. So on my bullet points of 4 bullet points here, we talk about people, public speaking in favor. My understanding is that comments so far have been in favor. Anybody in opposition? Okay, turn it to the town councilors for any questions you may have. Seeing,
I have a question.
If no one's going to ask,
okay,
I'll ask a question
just give us.
to Mr. Dutton. Are all the revenues that we have, and maybe this goes to Mr. Slamonti, are all the revenues that we have funding our budget this year, are they sustainable into the next year? Are we sure about things like ambulance receipts, where I see $1.5 million coming out of that, of a $5.8 million fire budget? That's almost 30%, over 30% of that budget. And if, for whatever reason, we lose revenue in the ambulance line, that's going to impact the fire department quite a bit. I see $380,000 from fire salary budget FY18, which is, certainly last year's monies. And just to make sure that we can count on property tax, we can count on local revenue, but some of the other revenues that we're counting on, can we count on them next year? And to what degree?
I guess I'll answer that very generally, and then I'll ask Tony to provide a little more flesh. Very generally, we never can be guaranteed revenues, whether it's local receipts. The closest thing we get to a guarantee of revenue is property taxes, as I think the councilors well know. So there's no guarantee. When we estimate revenues, we do it very, very carefully. We know very clearly what revenues that we received this year, which are essentially one-time revenues, and we try to segregate those one-time revenues so that those are available more for capital items and other, stabilization fund and capital items, and not necessarily for reoccurring budgetary expenses. But that's a very general answer, so I'd give it to Tony to make all the corrections to whatever I just said.
No, we're in alignment, certainly. And then I think the specific question is, we have two components in the revenue side that are going to support this year's budget, and that would be 1.5 million from the ambulance receipts, and then a transfer from a current year operating budget into next year. We anticipate, last year we received in revenue in the ambulance fund alone 1.78 million. We're trending upwards, so we anticipate next year we will be at the 1.9 level. In our projection going forward, we're looking for that revenue to be able to sustain, and the chief has, and the town manager can speak more to this, in his deployment of his resources in order to keep those ambulances out there. We're funding what's required to keep new and up-to-date ambulances out there. So to bring it back around, the 1.9 million next year would take care of the 1.5 plus the 384 that you see as a transfer. That's our strategy.
If I can continue?
Yes.
On the fire side. If you go back and look at the original town meeting vote that started the ambulance receipts and ambulance receipts reserved, it was in fact to pay for new ambulances. So I'm glad to hear that that's the plan, is to actually start to put that to the capital that the fire department so strongly needs. I mean, I can't say it enough. And I'd like to try to, just as a suggestion moving forward, wean us off of having 30+% of the budget for operating the fire department run out of this ambulance receipts number, because we can't use the fund for what it was initially meant for, right, in the first place. If we could allocate $1.5 million to the fire department for equipment this year, and we could absorb the $1.5 million in our budget, that would be tremendous. I mean, think of the equipment we could get there. We can't do it. We have to kind of cannibalize ourselves. I understand that. I've seen it done. I just want to make the point that we should start to try to look at a strategy to wean ourselves off of that amount.
I can say that in our 5-year forecast, we have a fleet schedule that the chief, the town manager, and myself have reviewed, and that's part of our projection. One thing that I think the council may be aware of, maybe the general public doesn't, is that the SAFER grant, which added additional firefighters, expires this fiscal year. So this is a bridge mechanism. The one thing we want to make sure of is that the percent of revenue that's coming from our levy, from our local receipts and our other funding sources maintains the same relationship. So if we were to look at last year's number of 1.3 in relationship to what was actually budgeted for the head count, I don't know that would be much off from that 30% number. So in fact, what we're looking at is bridging the same ratio that we have had. The head count and the decisions on that and manpower would certainly be the town managers and the fire chief.
Thank you.
Other council comments or questions? Mr. Gallagher?
Thank you, Mr. President. A few questions on the budget, and let's start with revenue first, because if we as a council are going to make any adjustments to the budget, we need to feel comfortable that there's room in the revenue projections to do such, because the budget is balanced as it should be. And I've been involved in many meetings with you guys over the last few months with the finance team and the budget and finance committee and finance committee. But I just want to start with a question to the finance director, and that is, I'll start with a comment and then a quick question, is reviewing the revenue that comes in on a monthly basis, and I only see this monthly, and I look at it, and I try to dissect it based on the knowledge and experience that I have, but you see these numbers 24 hours a day, I don't. So it looks like a lot of these, some of the revenue projections, and our revenue is coming in much better than projected in some areas for the current fiscal year. So is there any room in the revenue projections to increase any of that revenue projection, to apply some of that money to the general government and the schools? Is there any room in there to adjust these revenue numbers based on what we've seen? You know, I've only seen it through April, but you've probably seen it in real time with a month or so to go.
There are three, I think there's 3 line items, or what we call groups, for budgeting purposes under local receipts that are trending significantly above what we budgeted. What I'm need to do in order to make sure that the revenue estimates we're using and our finance team in our budget projection goes to a point that was made a second ago, is what's sustainable. So that's the first question I answer out of these revenue numbers, which are significantly above what we had budgeted. So we looked inside the numbers, literally, very, very in detail. So let's take the motor vehicle excise tax. That number is up significantly. It is a culmination of a number of things. As Mr. Dutton alluded to, we've been working on this. I've been working on this with the finance team and the town manager for, will be 3 years this August. And each year, we're able to get a better understanding of the numbers, number one. And number two, we're able to clean up problems from the past, be more timely with our billing, be more timely with our demands. So the long and short of it, there's a recurring amount in that local receipt number for motor vehicle that I say is sustainable, and then there's a non-recurring amount because we're driving down our receivable balances, because we're doing a better job getting the bills out there, getting the demands. So we'll see a one-time influx of revenue hitting that line item this year. We went into the, so a good chunk of that, let's say $300,000 of that number, 250 to 300, I'm categorizing as non-recurring. All right? So then when you look at what we're budgeting and compared to that number, it still leaves us room to have a surplus to take care of our capital needs, our stabilization fund, and our capital stabilization fund and other items. So I think that's within the reason of 90%. So we could have 90 to 95%. So we could end up with a surplus in that particular line item of 5 or 10%. Then we go to the penalties, interest on taxes. Because of the work that's been done in 3 years, we are collecting on tax title properties that have not been collected for years. So the penalties and interest on that are one-time revenue. We're driving down our tax title balance. We anticipate this year and next year moving that down to the tune of $700,000 in principal. If we generate $700,000 in principal, we're generating $600,000 to $800,000 in penalties and interest. Again, one-time revenues, because once we get that number under control, we know how that receivable balance should perform and how our collections on that tax title receivables should occur as we move forward. The last piece of it has to do, the major change is in the room tax. We couldn't budget last year, and we ended up a surplus in that line because it was the first time we were receiving a room tax revenue. So in FY17, it was our first year, and we didn't start receiving those room tax revenues until after December would have been calendar year 16 going in of fiscal 17. So when we went into 18, we had to budget no greater than what we received in revenue from the prior year. So we don't even have one full year cycle worth of revenue in order to do I think, a fair estimate on what that number would look like. So in that line item, we were conservative for 18, and I will be conservative for 19 until we get a full year cycle with that revenue. That all said, when I did the analysis, those three buckets accounted for about 95% of the over budget revenue that's tracking FY18 actual to FY18 budget. Long-winded answer to say I believe the numbers we're using are the accurate numbers and they're the numbers that can be sustained going forward. Next year will be the year where we can really, I think, see historical trends, know that we've got our receivable balances in order, and be able to identify even more clearly what those one-time revenues out of those three categories would be. I hope that answers your question.
Sort of. Meals tax, for example, and I don't know, you followed the DOR regulations and what you can plug in revenue for that. We projected $70,000 for the current fiscal year, and as of April 30th, we were at $166,000, $100,000 more than projected. Assuming that, the economy stays the same, and there's no indication that the economy is slowing down to some extent, that people will still get rooms up there, that 166 or however it ends on June 30th will certainly be a higher number, and we could have, you're just saying we could not project, say, $200,000 for fiscal 19 in that bucket of money.
That's not.
You're not comfortable, you wouldn't be comfortable putting $200,000 in there.
No, and this is the thing about municipal finance. I've been in the private sector, and if we need to generate revenue, we may think of creative ways to repackage our product. I mean, when we get set in this budget, 6 months later from now, if the revenues come in 5% less than what you estimate, 4% less, 3% less, there's only one way to address that, and that's with either putting a freeze on your budgets or cutting. There's no elasticity between revenue and expenses. It is this narrow. It's a different animal, and so as being responsible to the town and to the next year's budget and the next year's budget, I have to be very conservative in my thinking. I think it's aggressive in municipal thinking, believe it or not, but it's conservative in my thinking, so that I can say before you today, you will have a balanced budget next year at the end of the year. Your revenues will exceed your expenditures.
Right.
And I have to be able to say that.
I respect that, and just one thought here is I think that there is room in the revenue to make some adjustments, to make some accommodations to the school department and our general government. I think it's there, but if the finance team is not comfortable doing that, then I'm not gonna, scream up and down about it. But I think it's there. On the budget side, like this question's for the town manager, is in the building department, we currently have a $50,000 salary line item for a position. With a month to go in the fiscal year, that position has not been filled, correct? In the town buildings department?
In the town buildings, yes.
Town buildings, what did I say? Town buildings department, right? That position has not been filled. And yet it is budgeted for fiscal 19 as well, with a 4% increase in the salary. Do you anticipate, in funding that in the next 30 days, or filling that position in the next 30 days, or do you plan on filling it in fiscal 19?
Definitely plan on filling that in fiscal 19. We obviously, as I've pointed out before, it's an understatement to say we underfund our building maintenance, but we do. And we knew this year that a lot of the unforeseen expenses involved in our building maintenance program were going to chew into the money that we had set aside for the actual body. So we'll have to transfer that at the end of the year to cover some of the overspending in the building maintenance line item. But for next year, we need a body that, well, more than a body, we need a very well-rounded, capable person.
I
that we
agree.
can
I think
add
if we
on.
had that, I mean, I know that budget is way overspent in all the other areas except that salary. And I think if we had an on-site person 24, well, not 24/7, but full-time, that I think that would help a lot in some of the ways that not having a staff will over budget some of the consultants that come in and out. That's all I have for now, I guess.
Mr. Wood.
I'm not
Welcome.
sure where you are on the
Welcome, by the way.
agenda. Thank you. Thank you. Are you
We're
in the hearing
at the
now?
hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, yeah.
So we started at 7:40 precisely. What is it, now
Awesome.
8:15? We went through,
It's okay to start late,
we've
by
only
the
got
way.
3 hours, so take a deep breath.
If I can add a few
Okay.
comments, because I like Dennis's example, so I had a couple items prepared. So this body governs by policy and procedure, right? And so during the course of the budget season, we have three policies that we put together. So one is the ambulance reserves, which is a policy that's been in place now for about 7 or 8 years. And it's a policy that says that in order to take more than $1 million of revenue from the ambulance reserves, this body has to vote by a 2/3 majority in order to accept a higher revenue from that. The second policy that we govern with is the policy we put together in the fall, which helps drive our revenue projections. And up until this year, it used very explicit numbers. It used a hard number for growth, and it used an 85% rule for other things, such as you were talking about meals tax. I'm going to use the example of vehicle excise tax. The third policy is one that we had put together back in 2013. You'll see it on the agenda in the original text, which is the policy on free cash. And the policy on free cash says that if free cash is available, that is split into, I think it's 5 or 6 different categories and placed into essentially reserves, which are capital expenditure items such as anticipation of OPEB, other benefits. There's reserve for stabilization. There's reserve for capital expenses on the school side, and et cetera. So with those three policies, we generate the budget policy, and that's really the budget that we vote on each and every year, right? So the past couple of years, we've seen free cash, and this body has seen the worksheet for the free cash. Hopefully everybody read it. It comes out with the calculation of what it is for the $1.3 million this year. Last year it was higher, 2.6. Now some might think that we predict free cash when we create the budget, but we actually don't. As Tony was saying, we take a bit of a conservative approach and say 85% of last year's actual. And the reason you do this is because we don't know if it's going to snow. We don't know if there's going to be a hurricane. We don't know if people are going to stop eating. Things like that. We don't know if people are going to stop using the hotel. We don't know things. The excise tax is kind of interesting. I don't have the growth, but it's kind of high this year. So I want to use that as an example if I could. I think it was up 160% this year, something like that. Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's that high, but-
So what happens in the policies that we have is, yes, that becomes free cash this year from last year's budget. So we have a policy in place for free cash, and we say, okay, our free cash goes into capital stabilization accounts, and there's 3 or 4 of them. But next year, we take a higher percentage of actual, because if we use simple numbers, and let's say the projected was $100 in vehicle excise tax, but we realize $200, we say, okay, there's $100 in free cash. That goes into the policy. That becomes a capital expense reserve that can be used for fixing elevators at the schools, et cetera. But in the following year, the actual was higher, so we take a larger chunk of the actual, which was 200, and we allocate that into the next budget. So it's a following item. If the trend is upward, then it becomes a reserve item. And if it's truly a following item, then the following year, it becomes a larger chunk of our projected revenues. And that's across the board, whether it's excise tax, meals tax. There's several new items that had zeros. I think Tony probably talked about the hotel, that sort of thing. Excise tax is interesting because this year, and when we met in the budget, we saw lots of detailed numbers. There's probably two ways that the excise tax, the vehicle excise tax, increased. One is Axis came online. So everybody there brought a new car into town. Well, maybe not a new car, but a car that was new to town. So now we own those excise taxes, right? They came from someplace else, now they're ours. Secondly, people may have bought new cars. I know my sister bought a new car a couple years ago. Her excise tax is 10 times the amount that I pay on my 4 cars. So new cars project more. But if people hold on to cars longer and longer, if there is a downturn, that excise tax dips down. That's why we use the 85% rule in general. That was an accountant item before. And that's why we have the policies that we have in place, so that we have a predictable place for free cash if we happen to have free cash, and we have a predictable way to accept new revenues and anticipate them in the next cycle's budget revenue. And hopefully everybody understands what I mean. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Other council comments?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Thank you. And my apologies for coming in late, so if I'm bringing up things that have already been reviewed, please bear with me. So I guess in reviewing kind of the overall projections of revenue, have we taken into consideration the likelihood, which I think is very high, of the state educational reimbursement actually being increased? Because I think that from what I've read is probably going to be included in the budget come June. Have we looked at that at all?
We have looked at that and tracked that, and obviously our hope would be that there's additional Chapter 70 funding. We certainly haven't made any reduction in our proposed line item for the schools based on an increase in any potential increase in Chapter 70 funds.
Okay, so I guess my next question would be, and I don't know if we can answer this, my understanding with the school committee is it's going to be too late, but if we do get the increase, that would give us the ability to increase our budget to the district, correct? And I may be oversimplifying this, but I just want to be clear on that. Because I think what we're going to run into is the problem of the district finalizing their budget under today's numbers. We get an increase in Chapter 70 money that can't be allocated to the school, or at least they can't take into consideration that. Am I wrong on that, or am I oversimplifying it?
Mr. President, if I might just follow on to your question, because
Sure.
I think it might be easier for these guys to answer. If there's an increase in Chapter 70, does that go right to the Bridgewater Rainham School District's bottom line without passing through the town whatsoever?
That's a good characterization, yes. So any increase in Chapter 70 funds that might come from the state go directly to the district. It doesn't flow through the town.
Right. But I guess my understanding is by the time the legislature finalizes that budget, it'll be too late for the district to include that in their budget coming from the town. That's my understanding, and I think I'm pretty accurate on that with some of the school committee members in the audience. And I guess my issue here is we get that the likelihood of everything that I've seen so far, the likelihood is we are going to get an increase in the Chapter 70 money. What I'd like to see us do, and maybe this is a little bit of a leap of faith, but I'd like to see us take that in consideration in order for us to put that in the budget. I don't think it's going to bust the town if we maybe get a little bit ahead of that. And I'm not looking for millions of dollars, but I think anything that we can do to the town, I'd also like to see some money go to the highway department as well, but that's kind of a different conversation there. But any discussion on that?
Mr. President. I guess to the town attorney, because this, to me, seems like a legal question. I'm following on yours. Could the school,
Hey, guys?
I'll wait for him to be done. No, could the school district vote to assume a higher revenue number from the state than they currently have in House 1?
Couldn't even answer that.
Okay.
I don't have an answer to that.
But it seems, and it would just seem to me that the revenue for the school district is decided on the school committee level, not on our level. We decide the assessment that goes. So that's just my opinion, but that's why I asked for a legal opinion.
Let me put it this way. I think if we lead that assumption, I'm going to go on the assumption that the school committee will do that as well, instead of leaving it to the school committee to decide if they're going to up their budget on that. That, to me, I think should be coming from us first. Because the other part of it, too, is we increase ours, we have Rainham will follow lockstep.
If I may, the town does not receive any Chapter 70 money that then gets allocated to the school.
Right.
So there's zero. So if that number goes up for allocation to the town of Bridgewater's education, zero comes through the town. It has zero impact on our ability to make an additional appropriation. The appropriation would come if there was an increase in Chapter 70 strictly by the school, because when they put their budget together, they create a budget, what their total budget is, they have their own revenue estimates, and then they determine what is the assessment to Bridgewater and what is the assessment to Bridgewater Rainham. So if their revenue number increased by $300,000 because Chapter 70, they could immediately increase their budget by $300,000, I would imagine. I don't know what their time frame is for setting their budget and how they have to report. We have till December to report on our recap to finalize our tax rate. And that's when we finalize all our revenue sources. But there's no stream of revenue that will impact the town of Bridgewater that has to do with Chapter 70.
Okay. I appreciate that.
To follow up?
Yeah. And again, forgive me for being late to the party on this. I think Councilor Gallagher alluded to the fact, and we talked about this too, on the hotel receipts. So we don't see any, have you talked about that in regards to the projection versus what we felt?
Yes, I brought that up, that right now, or as of the end of April, there's $166,000 that has come in through a $70,000 budget. I asked the finance director, he's not comfortable increasing the current amount that's appropriated for revenue, because there's no history there. There's no
Yes, that's what he
history.
said. Mr. Wood?
Right, and that's an example of what I talked about. Next year, we'll take on a higher number simply because this actual will be, but going back to the Chapter 70 money, my understanding was always Chapter 70 goes right to the district. The district's budget is composed of a number of different revenue sources, including their own local receipts, Chapter 70, a couple other things, and then the two assessments to make up the whole budget. Whereas our budget is composed of some local aid, and maybe, that's going to increase too. I heard, possibilities of it, but we can't be certain of it. So we can't predict that it will increase and then spend against it. But I would suggest that if local aid does increase beyond what we expect it to increase, then we take a look at it, split it up as we want to, increase our own budget and pass along the 60% of that additional, if it's a shareable item, and pass it along to the district.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I probably framed the question the wrong way in regards to the local aid. I think where we're going to run into the problem is the timing of when we find out what it is, how much we have, versus when the budget has to be finalized. And again, I'm looking at it from a school perspective. I mean, you know, the highway, I don't want to lose sight of the highway department, the needs that they have there as well. I think we have a little bit more flexibility in that, correct me if I'm wrong, if we do get some aid that we can put towards the highway department later on in the process. But where I think where we're kind of stuck a little bit right now is the timing mechanism of when that aid is determined versus when it can be budgeted for the district. I'm not, believe me, I'm not trying to open up the pocketbooks, roll the dice, and, you know, just put caution to the wind. And I appreciate the fact that we have a very conservative approach to looking at revenue and allocating it. Again, I'm not going there, but, you know, I fall back to my earlier comment at the last meeting. It's always good to get free cash, and I agree with that. I just think we generate too much free cash, which becomes, in my mind, an issue because, as Councilor Wood pointed out, once that free cash comes in, it's earmarked. It's looked at one-time revenue versus if we get a little bit more aggressive on our revenue projections, that can be used in a multitude of areas. And I know the comment was made in the past, we had negative free cash. I mean, I don't go in that direction either. I would really like to see a little bit more of just an aggressive overall revenue projection to be able to, in my mind, help the district and also help the highway department as well. That's my personal opinion.
Mr. Wood.
So there is predictable areas where the free cash goes, and we do try to provide a fair vision of what the free cash, not what the free cash is going to be, but what the revenue is going to be. You can't, I'm really concerned that we're dipping into our ambulance fund too much this year, but that's a separate subject. But one thing comes to mind as you were talking about the way that it's broken up. So one of the areas that the free cash goes into, and it's not spent, it goes into reserve accounts that can be spent later. One of the items is a capital stabilization plan, source, which we didn't have 5 years ago. We created it, and it became part of the policy. So there, speaking about the highway department, if our capital stabilization is high enough, and the only funding that it gets right now is from any excess free cash that goes into that pocket, that fund can be used to buy a highway truck. And we've all heard about the conditions of some of our highway trucks. The other source is to use Chapter 90 money because that's allowable use of Chapter 90 money. But Chapter 90 money is used to pave roads, and we all know what the condition of the roads are. So I would prefer to be able to use all of our Chapter 90 money for the condition of the roads and have a predictable way to buy a truck in a couple of years when we need a truck using that capital stabilization plan.
Other comments from councilors?
Mr. Columbotus?
Mr. Columbotus,
I had a
thank you,
discussion
sir.
about, I expressed a concern that we don't have revenue estimates within this budget. And I was told that, well, we're not voting on revenue estimates, but it seems like revenue estimates inform what our budget is. And it'd be nice to have these numbers in front of us. And I see that as a real shortcoming that we don't have those assumptions.
Well, that was in the email earlier this week from Ann. Is it possible to get a copy for Pete?
I can bring it up here. I just think it should be in the package. That's it.
Other comments?
I just want to just reiterate what I said, and that is, and I have heard the school department over the last 5 or 6 meetings come in and tell us what the effects of a level funded budget would mean to them. We've heard it, we've all heard it, and I see in our highway department, and I hear it from people out in the town that they could use a body or two. And we all talked about that in the budget meetings that we've had, and here tonight we're talking about ambulance, we're talking about meals tax, hotel tax, and all that, all those pieces that make up our budget. And I've said, and I'll just repeat myself because I like to, because sometimes you have to say things 3 or 4 or 5 times before it really sits in to some people, but I think there is room in our revenue projections for fiscal 19 to make some adjustments to accommodate some of the needs that the schools are requesting. I don't think we can get to their level fund number. In addition to provide a couple of bodies in our highway department in fiscal 19. I think it's there. Maybe you all don't agree with me. The finance team has said they're not comfortable in increasing or making any adjustments in the revenue. And we didn't even talk about the marijuana money that's coming in through medical, the mitigation or whatever host agreement calls for. That's hasn't been talked about either. So there are revenues coming in, but I guess the question to my fellow counselors is, you know, do you think there is, and is there anything we can do this year, or just, you know, let's get through fiscal 19 again and come back here a year from now, and hopefully some of these projections that look like are going to end fiscal 18 are hold true a year from now in fiscal 19, and then the revenues will be adjusted. But I think there's room. I'd like to see us try to do something, if we can, on both sides of the general government and the school district. But if we can't, if it's not the consensus of this council, then I won't repeat myself. Okay.
Mrs. Loesch.
Just a quick, for my own clarification, Mr. Gallagher, I would love to hear where you think we can get those funds and just call them out so we can have a discussion about them. And then I know we're going to talk about this again for legislation for action. So just wanted to be sure I'm understanding the process of the hearing so we're not doing this again under legislation of action.
Town manager will answer that process question.
That's a great question, actually. The hearing generally is designed to hear from the public, and certainly counselors can debate an issue when it gets to the actual legislation for action. I think the president was just opening up the hearing after the public had spoken to the council for their comments. But certainly, if it's appropriate, you could close the hearing and have this discussion when it comes to legislation for action.
Thank you. That was one question.
The other question, I think there's room in the motor vehicle excise tax. I think there's room in the meals tax. I think there's room in the hotel tax. I think there's room in the real estate tax. I think there's room, there's that host agreement that's not really factored in here. So I think that's where I think the additional revenues could be adjusted.
Mr. Wood.
Thank you again. And I think this fits more under the hearing than under the discussion. So I'm about 40 hours into the budget, this piece. I know the school committee budget probably as well as anyone does. I've read through multiple contracts on that side. This year is actually the easier year. And this year is the easier year because next year there's another significant increase on the school side. That our revenues, even if we inch them up this year, just are not going to support. So there's a disparity between the contracts, the collective bargaining contracts between the major units of the town and the education. And on the firefighters and the police side, we and you've seen the contracts, the cost of living increase, which is one of three components of what a pay really is set at 1.25 right now, 1.25% increase. But the collective bargaining agreement, and I know I'm not making friends, I'm sorry, and I love the school, I really do, they do a tremendous job. This year's increase, collective, the COLA, the cost of living increase, is 2.0. Next year, it's 2.5, which is double our police and fire. And what that means is next year's salary increase without increasing any positions, 0 positions added, it goes up about $3.4 million. Now, we won't see the 3.4, we'll see a piece of that. But, you know, and I can't ask them, and I wasn't in the negotiating table, but it'd be wonderful if we could open up that contract again and try to bring it back into like a 3.6 range instead of a 5.0 average increase for each teacher. That's what the median is getting. And that's what I spoke about at the school committee. And It's that, and we still aren't clear on where the $920,000 is for the busing. Now, it's clear that the state doesn't cover all the transportation needs. And I'll call it single rider transportation. So single rider transportation is part of the transportation budget that's under contract. And it accounts for about $31,500 per bus per student that's under that single rider piece. And that doesn't include the driver. So that's a very large component of the bus schedule. Now, the individual van that's under that contract is $175 per day. There was only one bidder. There was only one figure. You know, it'd be great if we could go back to the table and say, you know, if you could make that 150 or even make it 155 a day, then that's easier to merge in with the two budgets and feed in. I understand that, you know, we need to support the schools. We do that with about 60% of our budget today. But there's a couple areas that are growing faster in cost than the revenue side, and they will continue to grow faster in cost than the revenue side. And this year, the problem is about $1 million, about $1.2 million, the difference between what the original ask and what we can provide. Next year, that gap is even bigger. And when that gap becomes bigger, there's operational deficit someplace, and we start to lead into the areas where we have to be concerned about staffing, both the you know, on the town side and that side. So yes, while we can say hotel might return $150,000, or meals tax might do that, or excise tax might do that, we have to look at the composite picture and try to manage the composite on that piece. Thanks.
Mr. George.
Through you. So with all due respect, Mr. Wood, we're here to talk about 19. I don't think we're here to discuss what the school committee didn't do, what they did do. It's up to them to manage their house. I would like this to be a discussion about what we can do for our revenues for 19. And then I would say convey to them our concerns about that, but that's not our place right now. I would not expect the school committee to come in front of us and talk about how we do our business. I don't think we should be doing that here right now. So let's concentrate on 19 and see if there is wiggle room for the schools and also for the highway department, instead of going through and making a criticism about a bigger picture that they're going to have to deal with. I'd like to keep that in focus. Thank you.
Mr. Columbotus.
If I may, just procedurally, before any further debate continues, I would close the public hearing, and I would wait to debate the matter further when the motion is being taken up. That's procedurally more proper at this point. It appears that the questions for the town manager have now ended, and it's just a debate over the motion. So I would have everyone, I would close the public hearing, and then I would have the debate continue when the motion is pending.
I have a question for the town manager. So is that appropriate to
Absolutely.
continue now?
Mr. Columbotus.
Thank you. Can we get, Mr. Dutton, can we get some clarity on Mr. Gallagher's point about revenues from the host agreements for the medical marijuana facilities? Were you assuming any revenues in this budget for those two host agreements?
We are assuming, right now, we've got two host agreements for two medical facilities, and within the budget, we have estimated revenues pursuant to those two agreements. Now, keep in mind, and I can ask Tony to speak to this, he's been researching it a little more than I have, but keep in mind that we will not see the same level of revenues from the medical facilities once recreational marijuana becomes available. So we know that the revenue stream there will decrease. We also know
It will go up in smoke, so to speak.
so to speak. We also know that that our ability to establish certainly a percentage, well, on new host agreements for what we do allow in Bridgewater, which would be cultivation, manufacture, and testing, we have to establish exactly what additional burdens there are to the town in order to establish a mitigation agreement. This is considered a mitigation agreement. It's very difficult for us right now, and I don't think it's any secret, it's very difficult for us to establish any adverse impact to the town based upon those three uses or those three activities. So we're in the process of trying to do that right now. The two medical facilities who would like to grow, as they told you, or like to cultivate for the retail market, are very anxious to get the agreements finalized. But as I say, it's difficult because we have to establish exactly what the impact is to Bridgewater, and we have to quantify and qualify what the mitigation would be there. So overall, as I said, Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see any substantial increase in revenue over all the marijuana together, both medical and recreational. So, do you have anything?
No, I agree with everything you say, and that's one of the concerns is we don't know the full impact of what will happen when the retail establishments become operational.
So I was going to ask, no, just a question. In the revenue projection, where is the medical marijuana number?
Line 21.
21? Thank you.
It's $100,000 this year.
Miscellaneous, okay, thanks.
All right, that's it. Close the hearing, 8:46. We'll debate this later on this evening. Thank you for that hour and 6 minutes. Appreciate it. Check. What's next? License transactions, we skipped or moved that around. Presentations, not seeing any. Town manager's report, not to be rude, but during that, I'm going to excuse myself. I apologize. Town manager's report.
I'm sorry, question, did we have a license transaction?
We did that. We took it out.
Oh, you did that?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, fine,
So,
excellent.
yes, we get to go back there and
He's pouring
So they can do business without us in the room.
So thank you, Mr. President. I'll make this report exactly the length of time it takes you. So I did want to acknowledge, we have been seeing a number of water main breaks around town, and mostly as sort of a public, we know. We do know that the water infrastructure is aging and in some cases simply faulty, and we are looking, as I've mentioned before, with the engineers to develop a long-term replacement plan. Obviously, that plan would merge with roadwork projects so that we don't do the old pave a road and then dig it up to replace a water main kind of thing. So that said, I know we had a break on School Street. I don't know the specifics of that just yet, but that was repaired, and water is back on for residents over there. Speaking of road conditions, I think it's been brought up, but we do hear the complaints, we know. And just so the council knows, we have seen a slight reduction overall in our Chapter 90 funding over the past few years. And at the same time, we've seen an increase in road miles. So our roadways superintendent has done a great job of updating our road miles for DOT. And the formula that DOT uses to establish Chapter 90 funding rather, has resulted in slight decreases over the last few years, which is frustrating. So everyone knows we receive roughly $730,000 for all of our road work, or just about all of our road work. So that covers anything that we have to do in town on a yearly, annual basis. To give you just an idea or orders of magnitude kind of thing, we have two major projects on tap for this coming spring. One of them is fixing a culvert on Bridge Street, which is putting the actual bridge at risk. That will probably cost us in the area of $400,000. So that'll cost us over half of our Chapter 90 funding for the fiscal year. On a brighter note, I attended the MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority meeting today, and we interviewed 3 designer finalists for the Mitchell School work, and that took most of the day, but it was productive. We had 3 excellent finalists in the end. Raymond Design was the selected candidate, the first choice, and that is the same firm, the council may know, that conducted the engineering review of the Mitchell after the roof collapse. They did an excellent job at that, and so I'm optimistic that we will finalize negotiations with them and bring them on board. They're ready to move forward quite quickly, so that was also good news for us. Excuse me, as I just mentioned, we are negotiating with the 2 current medical marijuana facilities, which are applying for cultivation licenses with the Cannabis Commission. We do have a number of questions, which I just sort of outlined a few of them, for the Cannabis Control Commission and the Department of Revenue, and we're awaiting some of those responses before we try to finalize those agreements. Also, so people know, we have staff has drafted amendments to the marijuana overlay zoning ordinance, which was being reviewed by the Planning Board and the Community and Economic Development Committee. That will go back to those 2 committees for rehearing as soon as it's vetted with the town attorney and the staff. And I will point out that it's taken some time, but honestly, I'd rather do it correctly than to try to rush that particular item. So I think we're just about there. Prior president had put together a group to look at the central business district zoning, and specifically the proposals of Jim Pascal on Broad Street. We've plowed through a fair number of those issues, and I'm hoping within the next couple of meetings to get some proposed zoning changes back to you for first reading and then referral. So that process is moving along. It's been stymied a little bit just due to schedules. It's amazing how 4 or 5 people, it's hard to schedule 4 or 5 very busy people. So, but I think we'll get there fairly shortly. I just want to remind the council and just sort of update everyone on First Street. First Street is a street that we do not own. It runs off of Elm Street. It's in our industrial corridor, and we have, at the request of the businesses there, we have been working with them to get sewer installed and also to repave that road. So we are providing our assistance on those 2 projects, really 1 project. And as I say, while it's not a town-owned street and the taxpayers are not paying for any of this, we are working to try to help them improve that street. It's important for us because it's an upgrade and an increase in value to those businesses that are on First Street. Ultimately, there's a tax benefit to the town. So again, we're trying to do what we can to improve the lot of current businesses, increase the property values of our commercial industrial properties, and certainly help people do business and be able to hire more people. Along the same corridor in the same neighborhood, Elm Street, last week we did have a discussion with the large developer that is proposing a warehousing facility on Elm Street. They're quite pleased with the progress that we've made, and so they're continuing on to their 3rd phase of due diligence. And on our side, we're working to refine the construction timeline and the engineering, finalize the engineering, so that we have a project that's ready to go for spring of 2019. Let's see. I guess the last thing I have for tonight is we did have, as part of our health and wellness initiative in town, and I've spoken about the importance of that before, we did have a 3-week session for self-defense training, and it was conducted by our new Sergeant Heil, formerly Officer Heil, and our new lieutenant, Carl McDermott. And we opened up the session to area towns who are participants in the Mayflower Health Group. And certainly my thanks to our own staff for providing the training. I think that was a very great thing to do, and certainly was well attended, so and well received. So finally, we also have held a number of harassment training sessions, which is, at least for the next little while, will be a multiple times a year event, and it's something that the town should have been doing annually for quite a number of years. So we've got a little catch-up in a way to do, but certainly it, from here on in, will be an annual event. It's an important thing for us to do, and sometimes people lose sight of the message that we need to give our staff, but we treat it very seriously and live by it. So that is what I have for this evening, and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. Questions? Yes, Mr. George.
I saw some messages about some construction or some work being done on Spruce Street. And I guess, and I may have missed it, it sounds like it's pretty considerable work that's going to be done for a long time. And if that's the case, have we sent any notification out to the public to make them aware so that they can avoid that when it's in place? Because it sounds like it's already started.
The answer to that is I can check on notice. Ron is usually very good at providing flyers to, and actually hangs them on doors, but I'll double check on that. But the public notice via the website or Facebook or something we'll take care of. Spruce Street is one of those areas that will become more frequent. It's got old drainage made up of aluminum pipe, and I think I've mentioned this before. That aluminum pipe was the latest and greatest thing that was supposed to last forever 20 years ago, and lo and behold, it was the latest and greatest thing, but it didn't last forever. So we've got a number of streets with that, and it's decaying and rotting and causing the street to fall in. So that will be under construction, but I'll get a timeline and make sure that we notify folks more globally than just things on the door handles.
Because I think, and I haven't been up there yet, but it sounds like it's very disruptive on the traffic. So if that is the case, I would have expected something to go out prior to the construction being done. I think we kind of have to get ahead of those instead of finding out after the fact. If I didn't know about it and I'm getting rerouted, I wouldn't be happy about it either. So, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sticking with our road theme for the moment, you had mentioned that the Bridge Street Bridge, it's been ailing for a while, and so is the Oak Street Bridge has been sitting there one-way stop sign for a while. Under the current proposed budget at the State House, that I believe either the governor filed or the legislature filed a road and bridge improvement bond bill for, I don't know the number, several millions of dollars, several $100 million, I believe. Are we trying to get a piece of that money? And what's the process? And is it grant that you apply for to try to get a piece of that money? And if so, I don't know the urgency or the emergency that's taking place down there, but wouldn't that be a better route to go than to use Chapter 70 money when we could use the Chapter 70 money to do another road?
Short answer is absolutely. It's really a question of timing. If we have to do the Bridge Street, it's not actually the bridge. The Bridge Street Bridge is in good shape. The deck was redone back in not that long ago.
Right.
This is a culvert just to on the East Bridgewater side of the bridge that's causing the problem. Excuse me. The timing issue is if the legislature has resolved the road bridge bond bill, It will flow through MassDOT. We'll make application, whether they choose to do the application through Mass DOT or they do the application through MassWorks. I don't know the answer to that yet. But we certainly will try to avail ourselves of those funds, as we do each time. We did a culvert grant, was unsuccessful. We tried to do the small bridge grant for the Oak Street Bridge, but the Oak Street Bridge was too big, too large to qualify for that. So, but to the extent that there are funds available, any other funds, we look for any other funds all the time.
Okay.
Mr. Souza?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dutton, again tonight you talked about, excuse me, the zoning on Broad Street. A number of months ago, I put a proposal in to update our zoning using town employees, some volunteers and former employees. Went off the committee and got killed, and buried, I should say. And then you came forward with a proposal that we put up $125,000 to hire a consultant, because that is the only way that we should do this. It should not be piecemealed. And here you are telling us today that, first of all, I haven't heard anything about hiring a consultant to do that study yet. Has that been happened? One question. He has been hired?
Hasn't been hired. I've had discussions with a consultant,
Okay.
Extensive discussions
All right,
on that.
so what you're doing is, we haven't gone that route yet, but you're doing the one thing that you said we should not do on a number of occasions when I've talked about zoning being so messed up in Bridgewater. Don't piecemeal it, and now you're telling me you're gonna go over because one developer doesn't quite fit our code. It says 16 housing units and he wants 18. Okay, so we're not gonna change that, we're just gonna go rezone just that area again. Isn't that the same thing that you said we should never do? You know, we gotta get this straightened out. We're losing businesses all the time. Business is what's gonna give our schools the money that we need.
I certainly don't disagree with that. I will point out that the council created a committee specifically to try to resolve the differences between this particular developer and the challenges that he was, or at least perceived to be facing in developing his property. So to that extent, we've been meeting to work out those details. What I did say was that we are not going to we're not going to do something with this particular developer that we wouldn't be willing to do with everybody. So to that end, small tweaks only to the central business district would be the most appropriate way to accomplish what I think the committee was put there to do. So we're going to propose minor tweaks to one section of the zoning code, which is something, quite honestly, that the developer could ask for himself. But I think he's doing it the right way by meeting with representatives from a variety of committees in town. But I will point out, and I think Counselor's correct, we do need comprehensive rezoning. We need to look at a comprehensive rewrite of our zoning code. Literally every day, town attorney and I both hear about problems with it and contradictions within the same set of bylaws. So that is work that will begin early this summer and continue on for, my guess is, roughly 8 months to a year. But I do want to point out that we have a lot of moving parts going on right now. We've got we've got a comprehensive rezoning effort, which is, in my mind, is designed to make the zoning code much clearer and easier to understand for both residents and certainly for businesses. We also have a strategic planning process that is getting underway, and we've also talked with a consultant about master plan updates. And all of these things are sort of swirling about at the same time, which is not bad. And it's really good opportunity for us to set, certainly the council, and for staff to be able to help sort of set a direction for the town, and which ends up being good for business, good for residents, really good for everybody. But there are a lot of moving parts there, and I don't want to, give anybody the impression that it's easy. And I think, obviously, I think it's going to be a huge undertaking. It's one that we need to do, and I think I speak for staff, we're excited to get it done. But it is a huge undertaking, and it really gives the council the opportunity, certainly to set the direction of the town for the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years.
One more question, Mr. President. You brought up Elm Street. Very interested in Elm Street. I was behind that 100%. It's getting it done in the manner in which we were going to pay for it. But when I ran some figures, and last meeting, you couldn't tell me exactly how many lots were still available there for construction, either 6 or 7. We keep hearing about one warehouse. When I figured it out, if the tax rate was $16, it would take $34.7 million in new construction to generate $600,000 in taxes, which would be $300,000 would go for that, or $25,000 a month. That's all sounds very well and good, but then you made a commitment here last meeting to one of our local businessmen and people living on that street. They were excited about it, to have it done by the end of next year. Now, that's exactly what your words were. We will have this job completely finished by December of 2019, okay? And my question is, there's no way possible that we could have $34.7 million worth of new construction on that street between now and the end of this year to generate that. Where is the $25,000 a month payment going to come from until such time that the taxes from those businesses can pay for itself?
I guess I'm happy to answer that question. That's a very complex question that has more to do with municipal financing than it does with cash flow. When we borrow for a municipal project, a large-scale municipal project, we borrow short-term. Short-term notes that aren't payable immediately. So while the project is being done, it's being done if it works out correctly, it's being done in conjunction with other improvements on Elm Street. We already have improvements on Elm Street that incrementally will provide the cash flow for a portion of this project. Obviously, as I mentioned to the council, the large project that we're looking at will provide, the cash flow, if you will, to pay the debt associated with the reconstruction of that road. And that's one of the reasons we're working so closely with this particular developer, is because we want to make sure that their commitment to building tracks our commitment to fixing the road. So that's a weekly conversation that we have with them. But I guess in terms of the financing, which again is a much more complex answer than you probably want, but in short, we issue short-term notes. When the project is finished, we roll all of those notes into a borrowing that's only exactly what we spent on the project. So that borrowing then is voted, we sign the bond, and then 6 months later is our first payment. So it's essentially a timing issue, but given how the state structures the diff and how it allows us to structure the diff, we won't have bond payments until after, if all goes well, we won't have bond payments until after the project is obviously completed, but also after the new growth of the big new growth that we're looking at is either close to being completed or completed.
Thank you.
Mr. Wood?
A couple questions. How's Skip's doing?
I apologize. I was on vacation last week. I didn't look at Skip's.
I don't think it's changed much.
Nope.
So many moons ago, years ago, when the budget was in dire straits, the selectmen at that point decided to leverage a 40R out of Waterford Village. About this time, you have to submit a report each year to the state talking about that. But I think it'd be helpful for the council to understand where we stand on that $600,000 liability.
We technically have an outstanding debt of $600,000. You are correct. When that 40R was approved, the state made a payment to the town of $600,000. Part of the hook was that that particular development, that particular 40R district was supposed to have commercial development within it. That did not happen, and according to the law, we still have that debt to the state. We every year we fill out a form that says, acknowledges that we have that debt to the state, and I am told by the secretary that as long as we keep filing that form, then nothing, we're not obligated to repay that debt within the year that we fill out that form.
Thank you. Final question. I don't know if the traffic study committee still exists. But if it does, I've been driving around Central Square a lot recently for various reasons. It's difficult. I find pedestrians have a difficult time on both sides, but on the western side, the side with the computer store, because there's really no break in traffic. And there's a right turn on red from Main Street into Central Square, which often, my usual direction is coming up from the Skips area after I've seen the store, drive up and take a left. And, people are always cutting people off, and there's always a strong, steady stream of traffic because of that. I'm wondering if the Traffic Study Committee could take a look and evaluate, and then you report back on the possibility of things like making that a no turn on red, to ease the congestion there, but also give the pedestrians a bit of a break in the sequence.
We call it the Transportation Committee now, but I absolutely will bring that back. We have discussed that over the last year and a half, and have not gotten any recommendation from the committee, but I'll bring that back to them. I've noticed the same thing.
Thank you.
Ms. Loesch?
To follow on that, can we have that update by the July meeting?
Sure.
Thanks.
Other questions? I do have one. Coming back from soccer practice, over by the fire station, I saw some water coming up, and a police officer reported that. Was that a case of aluminum piping, or?
You left the room when I confessed that I didn't know too much about that water main break, but there was a water main break, and I'll relay what I know next meeting.
Okay. It was cool. There was a lot of water. I was pretty surprised. Caught me off guard. But thank you for that. Okay, moving on. Discussions are done. Committee reports. None?
I'll report.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr.
So the last time we met, we had talked a little bit, but we didn't have the budget on this. So a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, the Budget and Finance and the Finance Committee met together. The full Budget and Finance, including myself, Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Haley were there, and the Finance Committee were there. And both committees unanimously supported the budget that you see in front of you. Thank you.
And with that, we move to legislation for action. Order O-FY 18-032, purchase and sale agreement for McKellen Wayne property. Mr. Town Manager, would you like to detail that?
Yes, Mr. President, I would ask for one amendment before I start. One amendment to the actual order in the first sentence of the second whereas. it references $1, that's now $645,000, so I would ask that, that amendment be made. I would only, I think everybody, we've distributed quite a bit of information on this, and I think the proponents, the developers, has answered any number of questions, all good questions on this. I will only add what I added at the last meeting when we couldn't vote on this, but the agreement has been renegotiated so that there is a sale price of $645,000. It does contemplate that the developers will both have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They also have to go to the Community Preservation Committee to seek the funding from the town that will make the project work. I think this is, and I've said it before, I think this is a great project. I think we've got, very fortunate that we've got the two companies and the two principals that we have. Their body of work is tremendous. We've had a great opportunity to have a discussion with the Executive Office of Housing and Community Development. We've also had a chance to speak with the governor about this project. They're both very excited about it, which tells me that that the state Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, and Mass Housing will be quite enthusiastic about it. So this is also, as I've mentioned, this is quite unlike other purchase and sale agreements for a house, for instance. This essentially gives them site control. I think they've explained that. They need site control in order to go back to the funding agencies, to the federal government and state government, looking for the tax credits that make this project work. And it also obligates them to do their due diligence in terms of hazardous materials in that building and so forth. Obviously, as I've said, they have to go back to the Zoning Board of Appeals, they have to go back to the CPC and do a presentation there. And the council would, assuming that that comes out of the CPC favorably, the council would obviously have to vote the CPC funding. So I think that's really all I can add to what I've already provided, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. There was rumor about an amendment. Anybody want to suggest that amendment?
Well, is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve with the intent to amend.
Okay.
Second.
So I'll make the motion to amend to change the word $1, 2 words, to $645,000.
Motioned and seconded.
Second.
Those in favor?
And just want to do all discussion, any discussion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Discussion.
On the amendment.
Is this the amendment?
The
right?
amendments.
The
Discussion
amendment.
for the amendment to change the $1, 2 words to $645,000, several words. Seeing no discussion. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Okay, now we move forward.
Okay, so
Now,
open for discussion.
yes,
So there's a paragraph in here, and I can't find it. I had it right in front of me the other day. So this purchase and sale relies on the ability of the CPC to provide funding out of the housing portion of their budget. And I'm looking for the description, because if we pass this tonight, and I encourage us to do so, the CPC still has to make a recommendation and vote on their piece. And the purchase and sale of this document requires that be done, otherwise the PNS is invalid. And if I could find it, Mr. Dutton, do you know which paragraph that is?
It is paragraph 6, or section 6. I think
It's on page 10, seller financing contribution, 17A. I'll just point that out so that everyone knows that if we take action and pass this tonight, that's not the end of the story. The CPC still has an active participation in the closing of this.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
I just observed to Mr. Wood's point, I know he was at a family function at the beginning of the meeting, but I believe Ms. Jardin was here and said the CPC was generally in favor of it and had expressed some endorsement of it, if I can say that. So that doesn't bind them to another vote. I'm just reporting to you what she said so that you're up to speed with all of us.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. George?
Actually, through you to the town manager, a question, and I'll pull this all together. I don't think it's any secret that we're going to need a new fire station pretty soon. Have we identified a parcel of land that is town-owned that we're going to build a fire station on?
The fire chief has identified a couple of different town-owned parcels that he thinks are optimal for that use. Obviously, that whole process would involve a lot more study and professional help to do a thorough analysis of where that should sit. But you know, again, sometimes the best advice is from the people that actually do the work. So the answer is yes, he's identified a couple of pieces of property that are optimal.
And within that process, whoever is doing the study would look at all town-owned property, just from that perspective, right? So selling this means this does not become a viable option for the firehouse. And I know that there's been some communications that the chief doesn't see it as a good spot for it. I'm not doubting the chief, but as you've just said, there needs to be a town-wide study in order for us to figure out exactly where the best place is. I've heard from the developers, and I've said this, and I'll say it 1,000 times. I'll say it 1,000 times. I like the project, and I like the companies that are going to run this project. So I have no issue with that whatsoever. The issue I have is with us selling another piece of property that ultimately could be used for a different purpose that could be extremely economically beneficial to the town. I've said this before, I say it again. I live with the Hunt School and how that went. At that particular time, it was short-sighted that we were able to get some funds for selling that school. That school would have been a tremendous public safety building, but yet we built a brand-new police station on land that we had to purchase. And I would venture to say, with the fire department as well, we're going to probably run into the same scenario if we give up this land. I really wish this project was on privately owned land. I don't think there'd be any issue with it whatsoever. But until we've had that review, I'm really not in favor of us selling another piece of town-owned property, with the understanding that it has been vacant for a very long time, but yet we have really not done anything on a town-wide perspective to see if that property could be reused for the town's benefit. I really don't think it's the right time or the right action for this council to make. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Souza?
Thank you. A couple of things. First of all, I don't think we should be giving them $1,345,000 of taxpayers' dollars when they say they want to put a park and a garden. And you look around town, and so many of our parks are being run down because we don't have the money to take care of them. The other thing is, I'm concerned about the paragraph right here. It said, we're going to reduce the cost of permitting, all the permits they're going to get to required to build this thing by $100,000.
What paragraph?
It's on page 10, FA, a good faith offer, reduce the allowable DHCH development fee by a total of $100,000. There's two different phases, $25,000 when they do the school, and then another $75,000 reduction in the fee. You reduce fees for permitting, you're taking money out of our budget. That's where I look at it. I don't think we should be getting these other money that I just mentioned. And one of the problems I'm having is they're coming out and saying, we're going to build 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. Our proposal in the other one said percentages, but somehow in here, I'm not seeing how many 3-bedroom apartments they're going to build, how many 1-bedroom apartments they're going to build. My big concern with that is, we know they're going to put 52 apartments. If we build a large number of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, you're going to be bringing more children into our school. We're looking at $20 million approximately for the evaluation on it. And how many children is it going to take to say, that's not even enough money to educate them? Our school cost is more than the money coming in. So is this a good idea for us to do? If they stuck to the original figures that I saw in an earlier thing that said they were going to be like 50% was going to be 1 bedroom, and then there was another percentage that was going to be 2 bedroom with only 1 3-bedroom apartment, then you have something definite. You can kind of anticipate the number of children who might be living there. But we're not seeing that. I don't see it. I might have missed it, but I didn't see it in here. And the third thing is, we've heard so much about how they're Brockton units, which are fantastic. I go by them often. And they talk about parking up there, and they talk about parking over here. If you have 56 units, plus you're going to have an in-house office there, so you're going to have at least 1 employee there to have to park there. Up in Brockton, the one that I go by on North Montello Street, it's on Montello Street and another road this way, and it's a long building, and from this end of the building, you walk 1 block up and you're on the main bus route. You walk this way to the street on this side, you're on the main bus route. You can see the tracks, and it's a very short walk to the train station. We've got over a mile walk to our train station, and we have no bus transportation here, so everyone living in there will have vehicles. The more 2 and 3 bedroom apartments you have, the more families you have in there, I don't think 52 parking spaces is going to cut it, okay? And you can't have parking on Main Street. So how is that, it just doesn't fit for this area to have only 52 parking spaces. So those are a couple of issues that I have on it. Let me see, I turn my page. Oh, it looks like that's it.
Okay. I see
Thank you.
a couple of gentlemen to the back of the room. Someone inform me the process and whether we can, how we allow them to speak, or do we keep moving on and put this till later? I'm unsure. So, anybody, throw it up there.
Mr. Wood's pretty good.
At this point, I don't, it's not a public hearing, so it's really up to you guys to debate the issue. And, I mean, you could technically vote to hear from them, if that's something you wish to entertain. I don't think that would be out of order. But at this point, you're debating it. I'm sure you've heard from them. So my advice would be to keep moving forward in that way.
I'll take council's advice. Mr. Columbotus.
Through you, Mr. Dutton, can you address Mr. Shoes' concern about control of the composition of the units? Is that, how do we exert control over that, if at all?
Sure, there are a couple of items. Control of the units, the purchase and sale agreement is just that. It's a commitment to sell the building on the property. The developers still have to go to the zoning board of appeals. That's where they'll flesh out the number of units in the unit mix. It can't really be done until they know exactly what kind of funding that they can get and what kind of subsidies they can get for the construction of this project. I just wanted to point out that it is confusing language, but I guess it's in section 16, paragraph F, what the $25,000 and the $100,000 and $75,000 and so forth represent is what is the fee that they are giving up in order for this project to work. They are absolutely paying whatever the going rate is on all of the town fees, whether it be building building permit fee, sewer tie-in fee, whatever the fees we charge everybody else, they will be obligated to pay as well. They've not asked for any discount or waiver of any of those fees. So it's actually what those numbers represent, what they personally are giving up in order to make the financing for this project work.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Gallagher?
Thank you, Mr. President. I have just one area that I want to touch base on, and that's the $645,000 through you to the town manager. So you've heard this question before, so I'm not throwing you a curveball. We will see a check coming into this community for $645,000. It will come into your office or the treasurer's office. Is that correct?
Correct.
What will happen with that money?
That money will come back to the council, and Tony can correct me if I'm wrong. That money will come back as an order. The council will vote that money probably into the one-time, the unforeseen account and be used for capital. It does have to be used for capital. So that money will come in and be allocated to our one-time capital account and our capital stabilization.
Okay, so we will, all right, so we can't put that in the motion tonight, that it go to the capital project fund. It's going to happen anyway.
Correct.
As a previous speaker said earlier, actually, I think two of them were kind of asking if that could go back to the land, the housing trust fund. Is that a possibility?
The council could vote it out of capital and possibly into the housing trust, but I do know that there's a regulation that requires sale of town property to go back, be plowed back into capital. And I can find out more, but that's the short answer, and that's where we intend.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So I'm comfortable with this simply because of that. And that's what my argument was all along, is that this is now, I understand the concerns about selling an asset. I understand that. I understand my Councilor Souza's concerns too. But when we weren't going to get any money that we could see, that we could touch, that we could put into a fund for our needs, I thought that was totally wrong. And I think many residents expressed that concern to me, and probably many, if not all of my colleagues. Some people still have an issue with the 1.3 that we're spending. I don't particularly have a big issue with that, simply because that's what that money is for. And we've been putting our tax money into that fund for 15 years now. And I believe this is the first project to come forward seeking that element of the community preservation funds. So, and money will keep, here you go, recurring revenue. The tax money from CPA will continue to go in there and build up again. As far as the language and whether CPA is still around in 10, 15 years, I can't base my decision based on that. The fact is, we're selling an asset that's been sitting there rotting away for 14, 15 years. We are getting $645,000 for our needs in the community, and I think that's a good thing. And I also think the project itself as a whole is a good thing. Perhaps there are some issues in the purchase and sales agreement. I'm not 100% comfortable with everything, but I'm comfortable with that, and I think most of the taxpayers will be as well. The community preservation, I look at it as a separate element to this. Just as they have to apply for all these other grants, this is another piece of the grant. But we will have a nice chunk of money coming to this community from that piece of property that we can put to good use for some capital needs that we surely need in this town.
Mr. Columbotus.
I think there might be a stipulation in the community.
$1,000 check comes into the office and goes into the capital fund as you described. That money could be used to finance a future fire department building, correct?
Correct.
Right, so I'd like to think of it for myself, not others, but think of it as transfer of value of asset, that we take the value of this asset and we store it away for a while and then use it for fire department later.
Mr. Souza?
Yeah, are there outside legal fees involved in this, an attorney's fee?
The developers agreed to pick up the attorney's fees.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Gallagher?
So, to you, to the town manager.
You're
So-
getting a check.
Huh?
You're getting a check.
No, this, again, I hate to hammer things away, but I mean, based on what I'm hearing from our management team up there, is that this $645,000 that we get will go into a capital project fund. And as far as you know, there's no requirement that the CPA be reimbursed proceeds, as Councilor Columbotus has said, for the sale of that building back to the CPA fund. Are you aware of anything?
Short answer is no.
What's the long answer?
The long answer is that if a project benefits from community preservation funds and that project is then sold after the benefit has accrued of the community preservation funds, then yes, community preservation is owed that amount back into the community preservation funds. In this case, you're selling an asset. The community preservation money won't accrue to the benefit of this project until after you sell it. So
Okay.
the proceeds from the sale come back to the town, they go into our capital accounts. You'll see that, it'll be in front of the council. So short answer is,
So then in 10, like say in 10 years, they decide to sell the whole complex, then the money has to, then the sale that they incur will have to go back to CPA? Is that what I'm hearing? Or am I?
well, number one, that won't happen under this scenario. But if that's a good question. That part I would have to figure out,
All right, but-
have to work on.
Okay.
Mr. Wood?
I used to work for a manager that always used to ask, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure? And now I'm feeling uncertain about this answer, whether or not there is an obligation for the check to go back into CPC at some point.
No,
And so my question is there any injury to this deal if we postpone this action until the next meeting so that we can come to the meeting and say with absolute certainty that the funds will go into a capital account as we've been described?
I don't want there to be any confusion. The money goes into the capital accounts. It does not go into CPC in any way, shape, or form. And to answer your question about delaying the vote, I think that could be fatal to the project because of the application deadlines. We've already missed.
All three of you agree on that, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay, Mr. George?
So, through you to the town manager, so are you aware, maybe not, of similar projects that have had this funding source that we're not running into a problem with the purchase price going back into reserves? So we have something to cite in case there's a challenge after this transaction of where that money ends up.
I don't foresee any challenge because I'm certain about where the money goes. But I've actually personally been involved in a number of other deals very similar to this that have been actually schools that have been sold and then renovated and rehabbed for affordable housing with virtually the same types of financing. So very comfortable telling you that that the money comes into the town, it's allocated to the capital stabilization, and then it's once it's there, as Councilor Wood mentioned, it's free for you to do with what you want in terms of capital.
It seems like the council's really enthralled with this idea of getting money for the capital fund. Why don't we sell it for 3.645 and ask the CPA for $3 million? And that way we could get a whole lot more. I mean, I don't like the logic of this, but really tapping out the CPC. for another fund, for a non-CPC essentially related use. I just don't like it. Why stop there? Why stop at 645?
I just disagree with Mr. Columbotus on that characterization there. Part of the CPC involves affordable housing. We haven't touched a dollar of that since we've started the CPC, and if that's the money that we're going to be using for it, so it's use it for a purpose that it's meant for. Whether we like the idea of it or not is fine, but I just wouldn't characterize it as not being consistent with the CPC.
Any takers? Well, this requires a roll call vote.
There's no motion, is there?
No.
Yeah, we made the motion. We made the motion, we
Oh,
passed
all
the
set to go?
amendments.
Okay.
We're all set on the main motion.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
No.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Haley,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. George,
No.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
7 in favor, 2 against.
Okay.
Will you give me a call when the check comes in so I can see it?
Big check.
There was a request for a...
Don't you want to see the deposit slip, Mr. Gallagher, and what account it's going into?
Oh, anyway, let's go.
Okay. Moving on to letter B.
That's it?
That's it, 2019 budget orders. So fiscal 2019 annual town budget, order O-FY19-001. I think this is where we discussed commencing more debate, is that, if I'm not mistaken?
You probably want to get
I'll
a
make a
motion
motion
in
to
a second.
approve.
3 hours starts again.
I'll make a motion to approve the first order of the annual
Second.
town budget.
Discussion.
Second discussion? Mr. Souza. Mr. Wood?
We actually have to have a second action to approve the ambulance receipts, given that the ambulance receipts are in excess of $1 million as per policy of the council. So can I make that as a sub amendment or a sub vote on that?
Yeah, I think that'd be
Yeah,
fine.
okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the use of ambulance funds of $1,539,163.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Fitzgibbons. Any discussion on that particular amendment?
So procedurally, because no one has the original ordinance in front of them, this needs to be a 2/3 vote. It cannot be a simple majority vote. And this is the risk that we run each year on using these amounts for the funds. If you had sat through the finance team's description of this, we're about 3 years away from it peaking out and actually decreasing and not being able to afford an ambulance. But this year, we're okay. We shouldn't take any more. In fact, we should be taking less to build up the reserves because this account is used primarily to buy ambulance and fire equipment. But here, we're going to use it for ambulance, fire equipment, and staffing, probably staffing in excess of ambulance staffing. And that's fine on this year. So I'm going to support the 1.5.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
I'd just like to point out what I talked about in the hearing, that ambulance receipts reserved here of 1.539 million represents over 25% of the total fire budget, and I just think we need to, as Mr. Wood indicated, start weaning ourselves off of that and getting to a more sustainable level. I mean, we just can't be stealing from the ambulance all the time and stealing from fire equipment to pay operational budgets. It doesn't make sense to me, but, you know, that's where we are.
Other comments? Okay, so that's going to require, per Mr. Wood, a roll call vote to accept the receipts of 1.539163.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Haley?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Now we move on with the original motion. Do we have more discussion on that, more debate on that? Who made the original?
I made the original.
And I think Frank seconded.
Yes, correct, thank you.
So, as usual, this is a process that, before I talked about policy, now I'll talk about process and procedure. So this is a process that starts very early in the fall to come up with a budget number. And we always start with the policy and the town council here. And then the finance department works through the anticipated revenues. And again, we've been guided by the auditors and the audit management letters over the years, and by a process by which we are a bit conservative. I will tell you that in here you will see a number of things that we've talked about in great detail. The 292 is the regional school district budget, which is $27,583,000, and there's also school debt. So when you calculate total cost of education, you have to include school debt as well. Unless I'm mistaken, the school committee voted on their assessment. I don't know if it was unanimous or not, but voted on the assessment, and that assessment was brought here, and that became part of our budget process. There's been many meetings by the Finance Committee and the Budget and Finance Committee, the Finance Director, all open formats, open meetings, usually on Mondays. We've had a lot of good participation from school committee members, from personal residents, from other folks that are involved in the budget process. And I think it's a really good process that we go through each year. And I think we came to what I believe is a reasonable number. So I hope everybody supports it. Thanks.
Mr. Souza?
I'm just a little disappointed because for 2 years I've been beating the drum to try to get more new businesses in town. And had we started a year and a half or so ago, we wouldn't have had such dire straits with this budget. We would have had the extra money to put into it. Thank you.
Mr. Columbotus, when we were asking questions, you had some maybe debate points back then, no?
I can't recall right yet.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Gallagher?
I just throw it out to my colleagues. Is there any interest in further discussing whether we can, I don't even know whether we can adjust the revenue or whether we need, or whether we're just to approve the budget or whatnot, or continue to ask our finance team if, one last time, if there's any way that revenues can be adjusted to accommodate the general government and schools in some way. This is our last hope. I'm clear. I don't think we can just sit here and vote to increase revenue. I don't think we can do that. I think we have to vote the budget.
We can.
The spending part of it.
We can cut anything we want, I believe.
Right.
I don't believe we can increase
Right.
the
We can only-
expenditures that the town manager gives us.
Sure.
So if you've made a motion to postpone this till our next meeting, and the town manager decided he wanted to do something, I think that would be in order. I'm not saying I'd support it, I'm just offering you different suggestions. But I don't believe we can, on our own motion here tonight, raise any more. We can certainly move things around within the $55,776,117, but we can't increase that number tonight.
I thought that. I guess the question is do we as a council want to just take a vote on the budget tonight, or do we want to direct some way the finance team to take one last look at the revenues to see if there's any adjustments that could be made? Or, I think they've already kind of said that there really isn't. This is just one last attempt to try to do something for our general government and the schools. If not, we'll take a vote. I'm comfortable voting on the budget then.
I'm hearing,
That's my 2 cents, yeah.
okay.
So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chase did.
go ahead, Mr. Chase, sorry.
Just one point that I recall from earlier in the evening. I know that we had spoken, the town manager had spoken briefly about the tax title redemption, I'll call it, and the fact that some appreciable revenue was realized beyond expectation. And I think that you alluded to that, Mr. Dutton, at the last council meeting as well. And if I'm correct, I think that the finance director tonight had made reference to a figure, something in the amount of $700,000.
So that was an objective.
Mm-hmm. And it just strikes me that since that is among the various sources of revenue that we've spoken about tonight, things like, meals tax, hotels tax, and whatnot, this is a non-recurring item. This is a one-time recouping of funds to the town. And, certainly I've been given the impression that it looks very promising. Now, that's not a tremendous amount of money in terms of looking at, the shortcoming of 2% in the school budget, but it strikes me that it might be one example of funding that could be earmarked for that purpose. And I guess I would just like to ask if there's any consideration that could be given to that.
I guess I would answer that one. I think you hit the nail on the head precisely because it is one time. Well, let me back up. Anything that's contained in our operational budgets relies on reoccurring revenues. So earlier this evening, I answered the question about, what if, how confident are we about our revenues reoccurring every year? And I said, well, obviously there's a certain risk that you take every year, which is why we approach the budget process. One of the reasons we approach the budget process and the budget formulation from a conservative standpoint. Because we want to make sure that we're not spending this year what we then can't spend next year, which would result in layoffs or so forth. So we're very prudent about our expenses. We want to make sure that our expenses don't climb at a greater percentage than our revenues are projected to climb. We're very careful about that. But we're also very careful not to use one-time revenues as part of our overall budget calculations year to year. So if we have a one-time expense, and I can't think of one that's not capital related off the top of my head, but if we had a one-time expense, say we had a legal a judgment against us for $700,000, we knew it was a one-time expense, we might take that one-time revenue and allocate that through the process, but allocate that to that one-time expense. So when we develop our budgets, the revenue figures that we come up with, we are just short of certain that that's going to be a reoccurring revenue next year and the year after and the year after and the year after. We don't, when we get, and this gets into more than you want to get into probably, but when we have a lot of one-time expenses, the council policy is to allocate those across, it's the free cash policy, allocate those across different funds that we have. We have a stabilization fund that we are trying to get to a certain threshold, and we have capital stabilization. So both of those funds are, well, certainly the stabilization fund is there so that when the economy goes bad and we see declining revenues like we did back in 09, 10, we have a source of funding. It's a rainy day fund, a source of funding to make sure that we can continue to provide the same level of service. So we continue to try to build that up so that and I think the finance director has talked about this, so that we can cover a 3-year recession or a 3-year depression. That includes the schools. We keep a stabilization account not just for town, when the town needs it, it's for when the school needs it. When we go into that decline and we've got shrinking revenues, then it's available to make sure that we can provide level service. So we try not, the bottom line is we try very hard, we don't use one-time revenues to fund ongoing operational expense. The town did that back in the early 2000s and didn't go well. And so that's a hole that we're still working very hard not to go back into.
Mr. George?
Through you to the town manager. So I have a question on something you said earlier about revenues. For the recreational growth, so you're saying we've got a budget here of 100,000, but yet you see those revenues going down because of the legalization of recreational. Can you explain why it's going to go down? If we've got 2 cultivators that are going to be in town that will be cultivating to supply everyone else that legalizes it, why that number is actually going to go down?
2 reasons. One, on the medical side, there'll be fewer customers if they can simply go to pick at their retail recreational shop and pick up whatever they're going to pick up. That's really the primary reason. The other is that we're not altogether sure that we can, for lack of a better way to put it at this hour, get our hands on a revenue stream from the cultivation side, the recreational cultivation side. The law calls for mitigation payments for identifiable burdens upon the town. We haven't been able to come up with really identifiable burdens on the town that a mitigation agreement on the recreational side would a dollar figure that would, we can't come up with a problem in order to ask for the money to solve it. That's number one. Number 2 is that we're unclear about how we can tax or mitigate, have a mitigation payment as a percentage of a sale that's not happening, because these 2 facilities are growing, and this is the question for DOR and the Cannabis Commission that we're waiting on answers for. We're not sure how we can essentially tax or have a percentage charge on a transaction, an internal transaction. They're growing for their own retail facilities in other towns. So it's easy to calculate the percentage of payment based on a retail sale, but they're not required to keep any financial record about, what's grown here and transported to another town. So we can't, you have to, if you're going to charge a percentage, it has to be a percentage of some dollar figure, some sale. And so we're trying to be creative about how we calculate that percent or that sale, or how we determine how that sale occurs.
Okay. So I'm probably more confused now than I was 2 minutes ago. So just explain to me how these are businesses. They're going to have to file tax returns. They're going to have to track revenue. How can we not ascertain what they have generated from a simple, I'll oversimplify it, a simple tax return?
Mr. President, I think I can help. Because I've read the host agreements. So the $100,000 you see in this budget here is a combination of a fundamental price, a base price, that was the host agreement, plus a percentage of sales, an actual tax on the amount of medical marijuana sold. So we are in fact taxing marijuana right now. And so there's a cap in the host agreement of, I think it's around 300,000. So this year it's 100,000. This second establishment was not online. I don't think it's actually doing medical sales right now. So all of our revenue from the variable portion of that is being generated by the first store in their sales, which are trackable to their customers as sales, and we get a percentage of that sales up to a certain ceiling level. But once, if you look at what's happening in other states, once retail becomes available in Rockland and Brockton and Halifax, there is a large portion of the medical sales that will drop off. So our ability to tax those particular sales will drop off. The benefit we see in those buildings, though, is it's a personal property tax because they have highly valuable equipment inside the building. We do get that benefit from the cultivation side, and the building itself is a valuable piece of real estate. So we do get tax on that. But the core value of the product itself doesn't generate a dollar amount within Bridgewater. And I understand, the transaction you're thinking of, that if they sell it to their Halifax store, if they have one, wouldn't we get a cut of that? And the answer is no, because it's not a retail sale. It's a book-to-book transfer within their own corporation.
So, and maybe I was totally off base, but I thought part of the discussion on hosting the manufacturing was, and the Cannabis Commission had talked about allowing towns to do exactly what you just said, be able to gain a tax benefit or revenue benefit from the sales that they generate to wherever it goes. I guess that's where I'm confused in regards to what I thought I read probably 6 months ago when they were differentiating between the retail sale, which is very straightforward, tax, and communities that are going to host. The mitigation, I think, is also for the retail sale as well, if I'm not mistaken. But I thought we had discussions that they were going to, the Cannabis Commission DOR was going to allow towns that host cultivating to be able to generate revenue off of the wholesale distribution. I'll keep it that way to differentiate between the two. Am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong, but just I'll talk about it not specifically because town attorney reminds me we're still negotiating
We're in the
agreements.
process of negotiating that community host agreement, so I just want to be careful we don't veer into something that would make more sense in executive session. And I think we
appreciate
want to
that.
be transparent about this, absolutely, but we are literally in the process of negotiating the agreement.
So I'll end it with this, not to go down the path, hopefully, that's even more, gets us in a bad spot. I think, personally, to Councilor Gallagher's point, we have wiggle room, and we need to look for wiggle room in the budget in order for us to allocate funds, more funds to places that desperately need it. So I'll end the discussion right there. Thank you for that.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
I'll defer to Mr.
I have a question to the finance director, if I could. So on the front page of the town budget that's before us, there's a couple line items in the revenue sources. The Entergy grant funds, both in the amounts of the 85 and the 67, are those that cover the police fire chief's salary, and I think there's some other equipment. But is the one in the middle, the fire salary, the SAFER grant? Or where does the SAFER grant fall in there? And the reason I ask is because this is one of the potholes I see in the road in front of us. And could you describe the loss of that grant funding in the future?
There's the Entergy grant, and that has to do with the nuclear power plant. And we receive somewhere between $85,000 and $100,000 a year, and we've been using that to offset the fire chief's salary. That was a practice before I came on board. So in this case, I wanted to make sure it was very transparent because that grant funding, depending upon the closure of that and the closure schedule and whether or not there'll be any sort of, for lack of a better term, mitigation money from the plant, we run the risk of that going to zero. So immediately, if that is the case after the closing of the plant, then we would lose that revenue source. So that's how quickly we can lose $75,000. The energy line is we've finally got the credits working properly for the use of the solar plant where we're getting energy credits, and we're taking those credits against our electric bills, and we have established a fund based on the auditor's recommendations where we account for all of that. And at such time where there's available funds there, we're beginning to use that to help offset the general fund operating budget. So that's that other piece.
And how about the safer grants?
There shouldn't be anything in there that relates to
Those are gone. The two positions are finished?
Oh, the safer grant expires this fiscal year. So we're bridging that with two sources of revenue, if you will, to maintain the same head count. And that would be the 1.539 from the ambulance fund. And then we're bridging the other portion where we're transferring it from this year's operating budget salary line item for the fire department, with the intention that based on the projection for revenue, the need to meet the lease agreements for the ambulance fund, based on the revenue projections and fund balance projections that are provided to the Budget and Finance Subcommittee and the Finance Committee, we projected out the next 5 years, and we were looking to sustain that head count using those funds from the ambulance fund and take care of the ambulance lease payments to meet their fleet requirement.
Thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
I'd just like to draw the council's attention to something we're going to be taking up under new business, which is Order FY 18043 capital transfers, which includes $215,000 toward Bridgewater-Rainham School District capital. Now, what some of us may or may not know is that once the town sends money to the school district, we're done with it. We don't really have much of a say as to where that money goes, and it's all under the disposition of the school committee to handle as they see fit. And so I believe we've put some, and I'd ask this to the town manager, some cushion in there for the potential capital needs that the school may see, but it really is up to them as to how they use it. Is that correct?
Excuse me, that's correct. We've recognized and had some discussions with the school district about their operational budget funding capital items. We don't do that on the town side. We've encouraged them not to do that on the school side, so we continue to try to work with them to identify areas where their operational funds should be used for operations, not for capital. And we've been able to fund to the tune of, I think, $215,000 or so to offset their capital needs. So that's correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Gallagher?
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. On the sources and uses of funds, on the unrestricted general government, we've projected $3,765,000 in unrestricted general government funds. Does that amount include the prison mitigation payment? Does that amount include that in there?
No,
Okay.
we can't use prison mitigation as we now know it in our revenue calculations because it's a special earmark that we may get or we may not get.
But you're going to get it. It's in the.
Excuse me, Mr. Gallagher. I think we're on two different pages. I believe Mr. Gallagher is referring to pilot money that
No.
we'd get.
No.
Not the 9/10 vote that we need.
No.
Okay, I'm confused. So
Because there's two payments that we get every year from the state. There's the payment, state-owned land, which is budgeted. It says it right in there, $294. But there's also the prison mitigation payment that's paid to us. That's in the budget, out the budget, in the budget. It's a game that's played all budget season long. But right now, it's in. And
There's never been prison mitigation money in the operating budget used as a revenue source.
well, it is in the revenue sheet. We got it.
Yes, but it's not part of the revenue budget.
I understand that, but it is revenue that we get. And I don't think there's been a year in a long time that we've never received that money. And the original estimated revenue amount under prison mitigation on the spreadsheet that we get, it was zero. And we've received $268,000 in fiscal 18 under prison mitigation monies. So that is a source of revenue that is regular and recurring to the town. I understand it's never on this sheet. That's why I asked
And I knew the answer. That's why I asked if it was in unrestricted general government. So it is money that comes into the town. I'm just saying that it is a source of revenue that we do get. Whether we can count it or not count it, or it's just one of those things that comes in, we say, okay, it's there, but it's regular and recurring, and it is something we always get. And as a matter of fact, I think the amount has even increased. If I looked at the MMA website budget to date, we're going to get a little bit more than $268,000 in fiscal 19 as it stands. So when I was asked earlier, specifically where I think revenues could be adjusted, I mean, I do think that to date, we have $3.7 million in motor vehicle excise tax. To date, as of April 30th. I don't know what's going to come in the next 60 days or the last 30 days. We budgeted $3.1 million. That's a $600,000, variance. I think we could adjust that $200,000, in my opinion. The room tax, I think that could be adjusted $100,000. I really do. And I don't think I'd be wrong with that. But I'm not going to make those decisions unless the finance team is comfortable with that. And I do think the prison mitigation monies that we do receive need to be in the back of our minds to say that is revenue that comes to the town, and it is something that we can factor in, even if some of these other things don't come to 100% accuracy. That prison mitigation money that comes in can kind of offset the revenue if we are a little low in other areas, because it is budgeted. I asked the town manager, have you heard anything from the state that we will not receive prison mitigation monies? Have you heard anything from your colleagues that have similar revenues coming into them? Any indication that will not come in fiscal 19? 1 year it was going to come and it got cut. I understand 9C cuts can happen, but right now we're not planning for those things at the moment. So that's where I think there is revenue opportunities there. I hate to use the word wiggle because it sounds like we're trying to, squirm our way into this. I do think that there is room there, but to accommodate some of the needs for the town and some of the needs of the school, not 100%. And when we don't count that prison mitigation money, I think we have to keep it in our heads that it comes in. It doesn't not show up.
I would, if I could, Mr. President, Councilor Gallagher is right. We do, most years, not all years, but most years, we do get an amount in the area of between $200,000 and $300,000. This year, it's coming up on your transfer order of FY 18-042. That and some reserve for overlay surplus is actually what we're going to be able to use to fund the capital that we're using in the 043, I believe it is, order. So we are actually using that, giving most of it actually to the school district for their capital needs.
Other questions? No?
So,
Mr. George.
forgive me. I'm looking at the MMA website for local aid estimates. So I'm just trying to tie the number in. Looking at this, for the 2019 Senate proposed budget, it's got Bridgewater at $4,281,019 in total estimate receipts for local aid. I'm looking at our revenue, we've got $4,244,072, if I'm reading this correctly. So what's the difference?
What was the number you're reading on the website, sir?
So for our budget, I've got local receipts at $4,244,072.
That's correct.
Yep. Looking at MMA, local aid estimates, I've got the 2019 Senate budget proposal of $4,281,019.
Yes, what they don't show you on that is that a portion of that money will go directly to the library fund. It's a special fund. So I offset it and our sources and uses, I show it as coming in, so we're completely transparent, and then I subtract it because those funds do not go into the general fund. So that's about 35,598. I'm wondering if that's the difference.
No, yeah, 36, yeah. Okay.
Other questions, comments? None?
So, from a procedural perspective, point of clarification, I guess, is from there. If we wanted to consider tabling this till the next meeting, is this the opportunity to do it now?
I don't think you'd be able, just based on the timelines in the charter. It's 45 days from the date of filing. If you don't act on it within 45 days of the date of receipt of the budget, the amount shall, without any action by the town council, become part of the appropriations. So I don't think, based on when your next meeting is, you could, unless you just want it to essentially become part of the appropriations. The charter is very specific about the 45 days.
Mr. Gilmour?
We could schedule a special meeting, though.
When is the 45
Fall
days?
within that
Yeah,
45 days.
when's the 45 days up?
What was the date of filing? So 3 days.
Yeah.
So Friday. I'll be in Vegas.
Friday night?
I'll be in Las Vegas. Not thinking about you.
Frank called in. Saying.
I'm sure.
Point of order? I don't think I'll be available. Any other questions or comments after I say that there aren't any more? No? So is this, sounds like it's roll call vote time.
I have to make a motion to approve.
There was a
did.
motion by
Did we?
Mr. Wood,
Yep, we did, and we seconded.
seconded by Mr.
We had
Souza.
We have this
discussion.
discussion.
Now, if the president wants, we can have a roll call.
So, not seeing that Friday would work in this group's best interest. Go to roll call vote.
Did you, are you ready for a vote?
Oh,
Can I just clarify something? So if we reject this budget, it's going to pass anyway, unless we meet again, right?
that's my understanding.
It's not clear, but I would think that's akin to not acting on it, right, under the charter. I mean, if you really read into it. So it says if you don't act on it within the 45 days, then there's an appropriation. If you deny the budget, we're going to run into a lot of other issues with funding positions and paying legal obligations that could cause a great deal of issues if it's interpreted that by voting against the budget in whole, we won't have the appropriations in a timely fashion. So that's a whole nother set of issues that it essentially says you're not allowed by the charter to do.
So could you clarify again the vote against? What would the outcome of that
The
be?
vote against could have other legal repercussions relative to legal obligations that we have if you vote against it and we don't have the appropriation to fund all of our specific legal obligations.
Can I ask a question?
I
So-
think so.
I can, thank you. So, and forgive me, if we vote to table, just correct me if I'm wrong, if we vote to table, it'll become the budget 3 days
Right.
without us acting on it. If we vote to not approve,
It doesn't,
then I understand what you're saying, but we could also bring this up at the next council meeting in 2 weeks to approve it and go forward, or is it just, is it a
well, it wouldn't
poison?
be pending any longer.
Right.
And now a new budget would have to be
Okay.
submitted within the same time frame, and we'd have to follow the same requirements of the charter. And I don't see how that's going to be approved by the start of the new fiscal year. It's going to cause a lot of problems. It would be a big issue. It would be against my legal advice.
Okay, question, Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can we make adjustments to the budget, like, say, in a month or two? Yeah. I mean, we're all, I mean,
The budget, bottom line, go ahead.
Well, there's nothing that prevents a supplemental budget. You can absolutely do that, and that's certainly a possibility. I never make that recommendation, but that is possible.
but, because what I would like to see is to approve, I'd like us to approve the budget tonight. Our hands are tied, in my opinion. Our hands are tied, according to what we're hearing. But I would entertain a supplemental budget within a month or so, provided that the financial team come back to us with some revised revenues based on what our discussions were tonight. If they don't see it, then they tell us there is no additional revenues to put together a supplemental budget, and then we don't do it. But that's what I'd like to see, but I think our hands are tied tonight, unfortunately.
Okay, Mr. Fitzgibbons.
To follow up on Mr. Gallagher's point, in addition to the $215,000 that I expect to be voted at our next meeting for the Regional District Capital Fund, if the town were to choose to gift money, and I know neither side likes to do it that way, but if the town were to choose to gift money to the school district, I'm sure that whatever amount this town decided to gift, that Rainham could match to their percentage. I'm pretty sure of that. So if that's the way that we want to continue the discussion, we could do it that way, but there's no impediment to gifting money at any time, is there? Thank you.
So, let's get finally, I think I've said it twice, maybe, roll call vote.
5 or 10.
5 has been 5. So Ann, if you would be so kind.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes?
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch. Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Motion to approve the fiscal 19 sewer enterprise fund budget.
Second.
Discussion? We just lost one, but those in favor?
Roll call.
Was it a roll call? Sorry. Oh, yeah,
call.
there. My eyes are a little bit blurry at the moment, sorry. Solberg?
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Motion to approve the Water Enterprise Fund budget?
Second.
Discussion?
None.
Roll call vote?
I didn't hear who made the motions, I'm sorry.
Me.
Tim?
Seconded by Mr. Wood.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus. Oh, sorry. Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
To approve the transfer station enterprise fund budget.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Wood, seconded by Mr. Souza. Discussion, Mr. Wood?
Only that I think at some point, we had talked during the budget process about the indirect costs in the general fund, and I think we'll probably take that up as a budget team item. Here it's $40,000. Is that the appropriate amount? It probably is, but we'll have a study to take a look at that.
Mr. Souza?
No question. No.
Other questions, comments? Ms. Holmberg?
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Haley.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Motion to approve the Old Scotland Links Golf Course Enterprise Fund budget.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Wood, seconded by Mr. Fitzgibbons. Mr. Wood, discussion?
So I'll ask a question I always ask on the golf budget. Are we going to avoid any transfers this year? And are we going to actually, are they actually paying back the amount that they are promising to pay as a revenue?
Obviously, we can never we don't have the crystal ball, but their budget is structured so that they will be able to pay all their expenses with all their revenue. In answer to the question about paying back, yes, you'll see $175,000 transfer from the golf course to the stabilization, and you'll also see a transfer of $5,000 to OPEB.
So I suggest, as a possible solution, because it came out of the general fund, to pay the golf course as a transfer 1 year, correct? We predicted in the general fund that when it comes back, that we consider out of the stabilization as a possible funding source for the gift that we're considering. Just a thought.
Mr. Souza.
Yeah, I have a question on that. Recently they had some damage down there from the lightning storm. Does the insurance company cover all of that, or do they need some extra funds?
Generally, they will cover whatever damage from insurance proceeds, and if there's additional monies, then that'll come out of their funds, their operating funds.
Any other questions, comments?
I have a comment.
Mr. George?
Not on this particular order, but what I'd like to see for the next year is a really lively discussion on bringing the golf course out of the enterprise fund and brought into the town budget, maybe under the Board of Recreation, and start leveraging this like other towns do as a source of revenue, that we can start offsetting some of the issues that we have, instead of having to treat this as a enterprise fund with restrictions. I think we're at that point. I think we've bent over backwards for the golf course for a long time, and I think now is the time to have the discussion on the possibility of bringing that under the town budget directly and not having as an enterprise fund. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. Roll call.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Haley?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
There's another one.
Motion to authorize revolving funds.
Second?
Authorized, motion by Mr. Fitzgibbons, seconded by,
I'll
Scott,
ask,
am I right?
I'll ask if you could, to vote on the line item that says Recreation Director. My sister is a part-time employee during the summer, and her salary would fall under that, so I'll recuse myself while you guys vote on that line item, and then I'll come back for the full vote.
I'll make a
Okay.
motion to specifically vote on the line item for recreation of $150,000.
So moved.
Second.
No, second, I should say.
okay, those in favor? We don't have to do a roll call for that or anything, right? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Come back in.
Nay?
Did he leave?
No,
No,
he's
no,
right there.
no.
All right, Bill.
That was,
You were standing right there.
I didn't hear it, I was on the road.
so now we go move to the other four items in this list?
Yes.
And we had, who made, we have a motion to go on the other four?
Now you can vote on the whole article.
Okay, so,
Yes, I think I seconded it.
okay. Mr. Fitzgibbons, any comments on that before?
Nothing further.
Dennis, okay, that's a roll call.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Haley?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Excellent. There is no old business, but there's some new business.
I'll make a motion to move order 18-40, which is amend, replace free cash policy to budget and finance, and I'll explain it.
Second.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Fitzgibbons. Go ahead, Mr. Wood.
So as it reads, it's exactly the same as the budget policy that we have in place today. Given the discussion over the past week, 2, 3, I thought it was important that the council, A, was reminded that we have this policy in place, but B, can see where the breakouts are, and if there's a decision to change the breakouts in any way, that this is the process in which to do it. So what I ask is that although we're sending this to committee right now, I ask that each and every counselor here take a look at the way the article is written and submit any suggested changes to Ann, and she will collect them, and so that there's no identifiable person with that. You have to do that under open meeting law, so that it's not coming to me, it's from you. She'll collect those responses, and then we can talk about those in the budget meeting, in the committee meeting.
Okay, Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Nothing.
Okay. Is this a, where am I?
Motion to go to the finance.
Voice vote.
Just voice vote, okay. So, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against?
Let's go into budget.
So that's off to budget and finance. That was 40, now we're on to 41. Transfer order.
Mr. President, you may want to take a vote to take something after 10:30.
Okay.
We're in an agenda item. We don't have to do that till next.
Oh, had he started the agenda
We just
item?
did start.
Started the agenda item in.
We're one into new business.
By like a minute.
So close.
I think that has to go to budget. I'll move to send
All of them?
this to Budget and Finance and Finance Committee.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
What was that?
Moving
Send it to Budget and Finance
18-41,
Committee.
correct?
Yes.
Move that.
41? Okay.
Yep, Budget, Finance Committees. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Okay, FY 18-042.
Motion to refer to the Budget and Finance Committees.
Second?
Okay, Mr. Fitzgibbons,
None.
comment?
Done.
None? Any other comments? None? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Against? No, I'm sorry, aye. I thought we were done with meetings.
FY 18-043.
Motion to refer to the Budget and Finance Committees.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Ordinance FY 18-016.
Motion to refer to the Rules and Procedures Committee.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion?
I think this is pretty much a change to the admin code, so that's where it's been done.
So that was the discussion. Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Moving on to the FY 18-017.
Motion to refer to the Rules and Procedures Committee.
Second, anybody?
Second.
Motion made and no.
No. Okay.
What didn't happen?
Okay.
I think you're
Oh,
zoning.
it has to go to the Planning Board.
Yeah,
It's a zoning rule.
So replace that with planning board.
Yeah.
So motion made and seconded. Any discussion?
To the Planning Board and the Community and Economic Development Committee.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
No discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? And G, FY 18-018.
Motion to move to planning and CDC.
Second.
Seconded. Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against?
Motion to take up citizens' comments after 10:30.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Against?
Aye. Against. I think that's just me.
You're against?
Oh, are we taking it out?
Of order. We're taking it after.
Out of order?
After
Oh, I thought you said
10:30.
taking it out.
No,
Oh, no, take it out. Nope.
procedurally, in our rules, we have to take
up.
up.
Had too much
after
cake
10:30.
today.
So in layman's terms, we want them to stay and comment, if I'm not mistaken. So citizens' comments. 3 minutes. Name and address.
Mike Dolan, 20 Sherrill Drive, here on behalf of the school committee, a member of a few things. To Mr. Fitzgibbon's point about gifts, gifts do not need to be matched by Rainham. If Bridgewater gives a gift, Rainham does not need to match that. Their assessment does not change. So your vote to gift us money would be just that, a gift from Bridgewater. Just as Rainham has voted to gift us in the past, Bridgewater has not. So just a clarifying point there. To Mr. Wood's point about the The teacher's contract and their salaries. I just want to point out that he continues to compare apples to oranges. Teachers work more than 40 hours a week and are not capable of getting overtime. Our colleagues in police and fire are capable of earning overtime. So therefore, you're comparing apples to oranges, not apples to apples. Also, in regards to the transportation contract, he continues to point out the $900,000 increase. This information has been given to him by Ms. Macedo, our business director. The overall contract is a 3.68 increase over 5 years. We have a 5-year contract. I want to point out the increases to the district are because of out-of-district placement. By law, we are required to transport special education students to their district that we have to send them to for their services. That is not an option. That is not a choice. The Lucini bus line received both the general education and special education contract. That was a cost savings to the district. We also moved to 82 passenger capacity buses, which was a cost savings as well. More buses larger buses means less buses need to be run. We are a 3-tier system, so our buses run 3 times a day, and it's the same number. And then the last point, prevailing wages for our bus drivers, they're union, they're part of the Teamsters, so we have to meet those obligations as well. And then finally, gas pricing, we swing pricing 5 cents up, 5 cents down. He was provided this by Ms. Macedo, and again, he brings it up tonight without giving the full picture, so I felt like I needed to. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunt.
Carlton Hunt, 80 Austin Street. I just wanted to try to inform you that it's correct that the CPA does not require a commercial entity to refund or pay back any kind of money that they get from CPC. However, and there is an expert on staff that I hope the town manager, financial director, talk with tomorrow morning. Her name is Jennifer Burke. She is quite familiar with community preservation issues, and I do believe that at least in the past, DOR, Department of Revenue, had ruled that commercial entities must repay at least some of that money, if not all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other citizen comments?
Jenny Burr, 45 Hartswood Way. I understand the complexity of being tasked to offer solutions and make decisions, knowing people will question you and not be happy with the outcome. Tonight, we stood for our families and our community to ask for that extra 2.06% to get level funding, and obviously we leave here deflated. With that said, however, we may not have gotten the 2.06% that we need to operate appropriately for our children, but I implore you once again, as I have stood up here quite a few times, to disrupt the norm. Do not stop here. Let's not sit complacently with this news and do nothing for our children. Please ask yourselves and our finance team how we can cut costs that the schools cover. I feel as though it is your duty as our council team and obviously our finance team to make this Plan B for fiscal 19 palatable and to figure out, like Mr. Fitzgibbon said, gifting. But if I may ask, with all due respect, let's not be blindsided by the limitations of that gift as we were blindsided tonight by the limitations of having to vote for tonight's budget after pushing the vote 2 weeks prior. Please, we must start now to focus on the fiscal 20 budget. We can't wait. Please, I know we have a committee set up Mr. Wood, you're part of that committee. Let's think outside the box. Mr. Souza, please don't give up on your fight for revenue and to make people think outside the box. We have to do better. We have to do better as our elected officials. Keep the passion that I saw tonight and push forward, please. I beg of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Other citizens' comments? Seeing none, moving on to council comments.
I'll make a motion to take item P after
I'll second
10:30.
that. Vote on that, and
Yeah.
then we'll comment.
Those in favor of moving it, doing it after, well after 10:30? Aye. Those against? I'll start on my left.
Okay. Thank you to the three members of the Budget and Finance Committee and all the members of the Finance Committee who don't get to sit up here and see all their hard work paid off. But you guys do a great job working with them. Thank you to the school committee for continuing and the parents for continuing to show up and advocate on behalf of the school district. Nobody's happy with where we are from a revenue point of view. I don't believe, and that needs to, as Ms. Burr just said, be addressed on the revenue side. And I missed the gentleman's name because you turned around to state it to our clerk, but when you said, let's not blame anybody for it, I will blame one group, which is the state, for not funding regional schools appropriately. And you can reach out to Mr. D'Amelia and Mr. Pacheco to make sure that, and ask them to fund us, especially on the transportation line at 100%. That's an important thing to do to help everybody along. So with that said.
Ms. Loesch?
I have nothing tonight, thanks.
Mr. George?
Just a couple things. This is my first year on the council, and I think one of the learnings that I've had, and probably alluded to, is we're going to have to better align both our budget process and the district's budget process in regards to timing, and make the joint meeting a lot more than ceremonial. That's not to say that we're going to come to an agreement on what the district proposes to what we can afford, but this was very painful. And I'm not putting the blame on an individual, I'm putting the blame on the process, and we have to look at that a lot deeper, because the timing does not work, I think, for either one of us. With that being said, I'm still of the belief, as I think a couple of the other councils, I won't speak for them, that there is wiggle room within the revenue projections. And I've said it before, and I'll say it one more time, and that's it. It's good to have free cash, but when you're generating a big number, what you're doing is you're underestimating revenues that can be spread out, and putting it into free cash that's very restrictive. Not to say it's not beneficial. That's not what I'm saying, but it's restrictive. Very disappointed on that aspect. I also hope that we don't see a revisiting of selling town-owned property and ending up regretting it years later. I just think we have more needs coming down the road, and even though we could earmark that $600,000 towards that expense, that does not mean it brings it in line with keeping that property and reusing it for a potential firehouse. That's, again, my own personal opinion. Two other things. I want to congratulate everyone that received academic awards last night at the BR Academic Awards. Just future leaders. It was a very good time, well put together. Last thing I want to leave with this. I think most of us are aware of the tragedy that happened in East Bridgewater with the kids from Stoughton. My wife and I drove by that scene shortly after, not knowing the extent of what had happened. Finding out after the fact was just gut-wrenching. So I know that the district has sent out, the town has sent out, a lot of people have sent out communications, but I don't think we can spend enough time talking to our kids about safety, about keeping things in perspective and trying to avoid tragedies like that. That is a scene that is not going to come out of my mind probably for the rest of my life. And like I said, my wife and I were there somewhat after the fact. So that's about it.
Mr. Chase.
I'd like to just thank members of the public who are here this evening, the school committee members, the teachers and parents. I think that once again, at this session of the council, your comments have been, I certainly think, taken very seriously. I think that you've demonstrated great passion, and I think that I imagine in this regard I can speak for my fellow councilors. I think we all feel very hamstrung, really, by the process and various limitations that just rise to prevent us from giving you what we know that you and the children deserve. Certainly, I hope there's some headway that can be made. Otherwise, I just would like to wish everyone a happy holiday weekend for Memorial Day holiday, and please do be safe in all your pursuits over the holiday.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, Mr. Gallagher, yes.
Just quickly tonight, I know it's late, but I just want to thank everybody on the council here for the great discussion that we had about a budget that was very tough. And we've seen tougher ones, but we had a civil conversation. We all had different points of views that we brought out, and we all respected each other. I've been through, as many of you have, through situations where we weren't all that civil to each other in the past, so I'm glad that we were able to keep that civility here at the council level. And I hope that with all the comments that have been made, not only tonight by the public, but for the last several months, that we continue to have this discussion as a council over these next couple of months to see if there is anything we can do for the school department and the general government side. I think there is. I think the council, hearing the comments tonight, we want to do something, and we want to continue to have the discussion, and I think we will. And on that note, I hope that the town comes out on Monday morning and assembles at the Commons as we take some time to honor those men and women who have fought in all the wars of this country and have lost their lives. The Memorial Day parade will begin about 10:30 Monday morning, and I hope everybody in the town is able to come out and pay their respects. It's a nice ceremony. Thank you.
Mr. Wood.
Thanks. I think tonight we talked a lot about procedure and policy, and this body governs by policy. So if we don't like the policy that is currently in force, then we have the ability to change the policy. And policies are wide-reaching, but that fall budget policy is the one that you want to look at closely if you think when we get to the spring timeframe that we have wiggle room. So it's the responsibility of the council to look at its own policies and make adjustments so that we have an easier discussion. Mr. Dolan's correct. I have received bus information. Kathy has been great in several exchanges. I do, in fact, have 4 outstanding questions that I haven't received yet. I still have difficulty understanding precisely about the $920,000 increase. It may be related to number of vehicles or something else. It may be unrelated to that. But I want to say that 2 more things. One is, last week I saw a group of probably college-age kids. And I said, and several people saw me say this, I said, how easy is it to get marijuana in Bridgewater? And the answer was easy. Their answer was easy. I said, well, how much does it go for an ounce? They said about $200 an ounce. Retail is going to change all that. Retail is going to drop the price per ounce down to about $60. That's what it is in other ways. The problem we have in this town is we decided to ban a revenue source, and I can't tax easy. And we can't tax easy when it gets shipped out of town and appears in Halifax or someplace else. So when we talk about limited revenues, we have to look at our own actions and what limit those revenues. Finally, I want to say I do appreciate everything that the school committee and school in general does. My daughter, like Mr. George's daughter, was at the National Honor Society. I think the district overall does a wonderful job in the education of all spectrums of needs. So they have out-of-district placements. As a line, we support the Perkins School, and I know there's a couple kids that go to the Perkins School from this district. And at the other end of the spectrum, we offer kids AP classes. So those that are accelerated and ready for college level courses, there's those offerings too. And those offerings don't come cheap, and we need to find a way to make it all balance out in the end so that we have a source of revenue that makes sense to provide all the services that we want to provide. And so with that, yes, Memorial Day is coming up, and hopefully everybody participates. Thanks.
I want to echo Mr. George's comments about conservative revenue estimating as a kind of a sound policy versus serving present needs. That's something the financial auditing firm talked to us about, and we had that discussion. Where's the balance between, being prudent and fiscally conservative and serving present needs? If we look upon this list, we talked earlier about development really is kind of the key to kind of solving our overarching problem here. Bridgewater developed really rapidly. We had tons of residential growth. Some developers made a lot of money. We turned a lot of farmland into housing without any planning, without any commensurate commercial growth. So we dug ourselves into a deep hole, and so we need to do some real serious work to try to deal with that. We, more than 2 years ago, we passed a downtown revitalization plan, which is multi-pronged, looked at zoning, transportation, business development, facade improvement, and we've really seen not nearly enough progress on that. This council passed an order allocating $125,000 to zoning reform, comprehensive zoning reform. It's been several months. I don't know why we haven't contracted with someone yet. Strategic plan, we talked about updating strategic plan, updating the master plan. This stuff needs to happen. Otherwise, until we solve these bigger issues, we're just going to be, fighting over crumbs. I appreciate Mr. Wood's comments about policy. This council has set a very conservative policy about revenue estimating. And so we've stuck to that, and it doesn't provide enough revenue. So perhaps we do need to revisit that and take a look. And perhaps, our stabilization fund was reserves are really low compared to the state averages. Now we're above state averages, and perhaps we can ease back on that and use money to invest in both the schools and positive development that can get us out of this hole. So there's a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Mr. Souza.
Thank you. I want to thank the Budget and Finance Committee, the Finance Committee, School Committee, parents who got involved with the budget, all the council. It's always a tough thing to bite, and sometimes you just have to sit back and say, well, let's make it better next year. And I think this is one of those times. But just saying it, as we've done in the past 2 years, is going to continue getting us to where we are today. We must come together and do things to change things, to make our town more business friendly. Look all around us. Go to any one of the towns around us and see the growth in small businesses, and then come back into Bridgewater, and then go up to Elm Street so you can see your 2 marijuana joints. And by the way, I once in a while I get calls from people, and emails from people who are not able to come here, but they want us to know that they are paying attention. They are watching us, if not tonight, when it's televised later. Or I'm not a kid, so some of my friends are a little older, so they go to bed at 10 o'clock, and they'll finish watching it the next day. But they want you to know that they do care and they are watching. Because they're not here, it doesn't mean they don't care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Souza. Okay, I'll be quick. Thanks, everybody, for staying. It's so rare that people stay this late, especially when it's just councilor comments. Born and raised in Bridgewater, I kind of got an interest in local politics because of my involvement in what was hot and going on in school and hearing what my parents went through to try and help me get educated. I almost fell through the cracks of the education system around in the Bridgewater area. I actually was educated outside of Bridgewater, so I know firsthand from the family side of it, raising children. I have an adult child that went through the school, as well as obviously myself and my siblings. So being on this side of the table is quite unique. I enjoy being on the Budget and Finance Committee because of what I'm learning and the fact that it's just more visualization of what could be changed, what can be changed, what is being changed. And the same goes for me being on the council. So on to other things. We are in the middle of May, and May is National Military Appreciation Month. We've missed a couple of important days. I don't know if everybody celebrates these, but we have Loyalty Day, which was on the 1st, Public Service Recognition Week, which was last week, Victory Day, VE Day, Victory in Europe, on the 8th. Military Spouse Appreciation Day was the 11th. Very important day was the 19th, that I know some folks reached out to me to make sure I mentioned Armed Forces Day. Again, that was May 19th, this past Saturday, which I observed that day. And of course, Monday being the important and previously mentioned Memorial Day. It's another event and ceremony that I'm proud to be a part of, and we'll be there marching in the parade and may say a word or two in the common. Last two things really quickly. I'm sorry to keep you up. I know I'm the last one. I had my first proclamation as president with a family friend, Mrs. Gabriel, Judith Gabriel, who spent 39 years helping the library. It was a really nice event. We had some finger sandwiches, which were very exciting to me. But just knowing her and growing up with her family, most particularly David, and messing around in the backyard and having a good time, knowing that she did so much for this town, and realizing a little bit more deeply what she did for the library, she's been a tremendous asset and will continue to be that. So that was a great privilege of mine for two reasons. And I think we already mentioned that the step off for the parade is Perkins Ave, 10:30 step off. We'll wind up quick 30-minute jog up the street, and at the ceremony at the Common. That's all I have.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Good night. It's adjourned.